Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, buddy.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And this is where we answer the cycling and triathlon related questions you've submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast, which I'm not sure if anything like has changed, or maybe we've explained something better, but you guys have been submitting really good questions lately, like a broad variety of questions. It's been really fun. So I read all of those every week. So it's a lot of questions, but please keep doing so. We really appreciate it. Should we just get straight into the job postings? We said we were going to mention that first last week.
We have two postings still open, one for copywriter.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people, so if you want to have the be part of that, submit soon.
Mm-hmm.
And then React Native Engineers, we still have some openings for that. We were filling a bunch of roles for it, so not too late.
You can find those at trainerroad.com/jobs. And is that it on that front? Let's get straight into questions then. How about that? First one's from Maddie. He says, "Hi guys, first off, thanks for an amazing podcast. I stumbled onto the podcast while discovering my newfound love of cycling. Proud to say your podcast has driven me to become a TrainerRoad user, so kudos." Awesome. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks for trusting us. He says, "I played hockey my entire life." I'm going to guess this fella's from Canada in this case, eh? And he is, actually. I read ahead. I cheated. He says, "I played hockey my entire life, more recreationally than high level, and it was basically my main source of exercise up until about 2.5 years ago when I was severely injured and realized I needed to hang up the skates." Like, adult onset cycling is a super common thing, right? It's
when you break your body doing something else. You have to revert to something with lower impact.
Yeah, exactly. Or
you tried running.
Yeah. Or you rode your bike to class in college, and then as a result, you started doing, it's pretty cool. So he says that drove him to realize that he needed to hang up the skates. I'd always wanted to get into cycling, and so I did now that hockey was out of my life, and quickly fell in love with what it is doing for my mental health and overall well-being. I'm a competitive guy, but since my hockey accident, I'm scared to push myself into racing as I need something more than just group rides to fuel my passion. So I've decided to pursue triathlon. I'll start with the sprint distance," he says, "and compete against the voice in my head that says I can't do it. Within the last few weeks, I went from riding my bike 1 to 2 times per week at a moderate pace, but not really extending much past my comfort zone, to now swimming 2 to 3 times per week, doing sweet spot-based low volume 1 and a 5 to 7 kilometer run, and at least one 30-minute strength workout as well. I do all of this in 6 days a week and make sure I'm leaving 1 day for complete relaxing and recovery. However, I've noticed that since amping up my training, I've noticed many times where I've been struggling with heartburn and acid reflux type sensations. I tried a Vega Sport recovery drink, which I thought maybe my gut just couldn't handle, but the heartburn has kind of stuck around for a little while now that I stopped using that specific drink. Forgive me. I'm obviously going to bring this up with my doctor, but just wanted to bring the question to you guys and see if there's anything obvious I'm missing. Am I pushing myself too hard? Is my body just reacting to the new workload? Will this go away? Should I consider specific nutritional tactics? Thanks again, and he says, I really do see you guys as my own personal coaches, so excited to hear your feedback.
Nice.
That's pretty cool. Thanks, Maddie. Appreciate that. So we've got, Chad's got a lot of information on acid reflux in general, and we'll go into that.
Yeah.
But also, this isn't the first time that I've heard this for sure. We've had questions submitted where I've seen people discuss this.
I deal with this. I dealt with this. So get to that on a pretty regular basis.
Cool. Awesome.
Lots of people have acid reflux. Lots of people do endurance training.
Yeah. They overlap.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll see what Chad says, but there's always false. It's like correlated, not causation. Yeah. Like it just happens at the same time. Or pink socks when my team wins. Yeah. Therefore,
pink socks win. Yeah. Cool. So Chad, dig in.
I do have quite a bit of information on this. I'll try to get through it rather quickly, but I think it's all germane.
At your own pace, Chad.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so let me start off by quickly listing the basic anatomical structures that are involved with the possible disorder that you're describing here, Maddie. So you have your esophagus, which is crudely the tube that links your throat to your stomach, obviously your stomach, and of course their connection. It's something called the lower esophageal sphincter. Probably just call it LES from this point forward. Mm-hmm. The issue of heartburn revolves around these 3 parts of the digestive tract, and are simply due to the way acid or possibly even acid-coated contents of the stomach can back up from the stomach into the esophagus and lead to various levels of discomfort and potentially much bigger issues. So let me also briefly differentiate between 3 terms that you use synonymously but don't necessarily describe the same thing. First is acid reflux, which is the occasional version of what I just described, that whole backing up into the esophagus. The second one is GERD, G-E-R-D, and it's an acronym for gastroesophageal reflux disease. So gastro meaning stomach, esophageal, I'm sure you can put that one together. The reflux that I just described, and disease because this is the chronic, more severe form of acid reflux. And then heartburn is just a symptom of either. So it's not its own thing, it's a symptom of either of those two things.
Got it.
So we're really talking about 2 degrees of the same disorder, and heartburn itself is just a shared symptom.
Okay.
Clear on that?
Hot dogs. Whenever I think of like heartburn, I think of like hot dog stands in New York City.
Well, that's a likely cause. So most people have experienced heartburn. For those who haven't, it presents as a burning sensation, basically starting in your sternum up to your throat, basically. And again, it's caused by that stomach acid coming back into contact with the more sensitive tissues of the esophagus, which is far less acid resilient than the stomach. It's usually accompanied by a sour or bitter taste in the mouth, very common and really easily addressed using over-the-counter antacids, but this assumes that the frequency isn't a concern, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a bit. So heartburn is just a symptom of reflux, whether it's infrequent or chronic. And now let's move on to a little bit more information on each of those digestive disorders.
Cool.
So with acid reflux, the lower esophageal sphincter, that LES I just talked about, is weakened. It doesn't tighten properly. And this could be due to something like a hiatal hernia, but far more commonly it's dietary or drug-related. Foods like chocolate, coffee, tea, tomatoes, tomato products, to name a few. Drugs like antihistamines, calcium channel blockers, analgesics or pain relievers, sedatives, antidepressants. Some of these I'm going to elaborate on in a bit because they may be relevant. But whatever weakens or relaxes the sphincter, the results are that stomach acid makes its way back up into the esophagus. Okay, so GERD, on the other hand, the gastroesophageal reflux disease, is again the chronic or recurring form of acid reflux, where the diagnosis threshold is set at 2 times per week. 2 times per week. So over 2 times per week, and chances are you're afflicted with GERD. But it's really any frequency that leads to a persistent inflammation of the esophagus. Okay. So obviously something that's going to have to be determined by a physician, which over the long term can lead to bleeding, ulcers, scarring, sometimes even cancer, esophageal specifically. Its symptoms are definitely past the point of heartburn, but of course heartburn's included. They are things like bad breath, damaged tooth enamel, degrees of regurgitation. You can get a bit of a literal hot mess back in your mouth. I'm sure we've all experienced this at some point in time. Chest pain, persistent dry cough, asthma, trouble swallowing, some of the symptoms. So if those resonate with you, consider what might be going on. So to review, we're really talking about the difference between occasional acid reflux and more frequent bouts of reflux, which might point to GERD. That being the case, this is where a physician probably ought to enter your picture.
Got it. Okay.
And for what it's worth, I feel like I can speak on this topic with a bit of authority because back in my early 20s, I worked early mornings at UPS, and I dealt with what I thought was heartburn, was diagnosed as GERD, GERD. And it does make me wonder what sleep's impact might have been on it because those were early mornings. I was on Prilosec here and there. Eventually, the symptoms just abated. I don't really know why, but probably due to the changes that I made in my diet because it was very clear what I could and could not tolerate, both in forms of food and liquid. It was extremely painful, but it went away. These days, I still deal with heartburn, but from time to time. And in all likelihood, I have what's called peptic esophageal stricture. We just recently figured this out, which is the narrowing of the portion of my esophagus. Makes swallowing really difficult sometimes. And it's probably related to what I dealt with in my 20s, maybe not. And then, of course, when it comes to the occasional heartburn, I'm very aware of what brings it on. I mean, I know what I'm getting myself into. It's easy to recognize.
So I have a question.
Shoot.
Were you guys gentle with the packages at UPS?
Very. Said when we got a little upset.
Yeah, did you play football or rugby with the package?
I knew it.
No comments.
Never, Chad.
No comment. No, I don't want to disparage the current UPS folk. Okay, so on that note, let's talk about possible causes. So as I mentioned earlier, several drugs can cause different degrees of acid reflux. Amongst them are NSAIDs, so non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. I think ibuprofen, most commonly used. So drugs like brand names like Advil, Motrin.
So can I jump in a couple times?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Maddie, you're raising up your endurance. A lot of people go, I'm sore. Take an ibuprofen. You'd be taking a lot of that. That could be could be one.
Basically, everything I'm going to list right here, I think, is absolutely something he could
endurance
potentially
athletes could be doing.
using endurance athletes and just people, but endurance
And in
athletes.
general, ibuprofen is not recommended for endurance athletes because it blunts adaptions. So don't do it.
Okay, so back to ibuprofen. These can irritate the stomach and esophagus linings, and long-term can lead to bleeding and ulcers. So overuse has consequences. Aspirin can also cause heartburn. So unless you're taking it for heart health reasons, maybe consider using Tylenol or another brand of acetaminophen as your go-to pain reliever if you think heartburn is an issue. Osteoporosis medications. If you're on them, you know the names better than I do. Iron supplements. And while yes, supplementing iron can help red blood cell production, can help us better transport oxygen to our working muscles, can improve energy levels, immune function, combat iron deficiency anemia, which is the topic that we're going to cover in next podcast deep dive.
Cool.
It can also cause heartburn. So the advice for avoiding heartburn in this context is typically to take iron supplements with food and avoid taking them before bed.
Vitamin C kind of foods. That's good. It helps absorption
of iron. Yeah. Yep. And then high blood pressure medications. So I mentioned calcium channel blockers earlier, also beta blockers. There are many forms of high blood pressure medications to choose from. So ask your doctor for an alternative blood pressure medication if you suspect that your medication is causing heartburn or acid reflux. Anti-anxiety drugs. Again, ask your doctor for alternative medications if you think that's the cause. Tricyclic antidepressants, and this is just a specific class of antidepressants. So if you're on this class of antidepressants, ask your doctor for another class of antidepressants. Antibiotics, tetracycline is one I saw named specifically. I'm sure there are others. Alcohol consumption, which, I mean, is it really hard to imagine that a literal poison might be causing a bit of GI distress?
Strange, huh?
So I feel like I didn't need to
I like
list that one.
when he says it, he smiles.
Yeah.
He just can't help but think
Well, I'm
of
just
it.
saying, you know that I've suffered from this, and I mean, it's like I said, it's not too hard to connect the dots.
Right.
Other possible causes. So I'll run through these pretty quickly. Obesity, due supposedly to extra pressure on the abdomen. Smoking, which is tied to basically everything that's bad for a body. Pregnancy, which is attributed to the elevation of progesterone, which can cause the esophageal muscles to relax, and I assume this includes that LES.
Hey, yeah. Actually, I mean, I've never been pregnant, but yeah, my
Sarah,
wife.
perhaps?
Yeah. When I remember she had never suffered with it, and then
Until
once
pregnancy. Well, goodish news on that front is that it typically ends with childbirth.
And
so
it did?
Pressure goes, okay, wow. Ding, ding, ding. And then even late night meals, lying down after eating, and of particular relevance to us, eating too close to a workout. All these things can facilitate the reflux. So what are some of the recommended treatments? Obviously, lose weight, quit smoking, dietary modifications like reducing fatty food intake. Supposedly due to longer digestion times, there's a relaxation of the LES. I couldn't quite put that together, but it's there. So I didn't dig into that too much. Avoiding spicy or acidic foods, pretty obvious. And peppermint, oddly. Turns out peppermint actually relaxes that lower esophageal sphincter also.
Interesting.
So, why?
I like how he didn't mention alcohol.
No.
It's coming.
Up next, reducing alcohol, after which I put duh. So,
Just for his own self.
it's in there. It's in my notes. Eating smaller meals, remaining upright for a few hours after eating. Even going so far as to avoid tight-fitting clothing because that can create additional abdominal pressure.
There we go. Nate's funny over here.
Okay, so, and then of course you can medicate, and I'm just going to touch on the three big hitters, the most suggested medications, one over the counter, two prescribed. So antacids are effectively the Band-Aid or the quick fix.
Is that like Tums,
Yeah,
something like
that's
that?
chewy.
Yeah, exactly that. Neutralize stomach acid, but they do have a record for inhibiting both protein and other nutrient uptake. So specifically, I think maybe I get to that later. But anyway, they often contain calcium, which can also inhibit iron absorption. Again, the topic for my next deep dive. And excess calcium can lead to kidney stones, affect heart and brain function. No big
Don't
deal.
eat them every day.
Yeah.
If
Well,
your
that's
plan is to eat them after every meal, that's probably not the best plan.
And exactly right. So these are just a handful of the reasons why frequent use or usage in high quantities, because some people just pop these like M&Ms.
Yeah.
Why over-reliance on over-the-counter antacids should be avoided. So over-reliance, over being the key term there. But in frequent use, accompanied by a pretty rapid elimination of heartburn, probably okay. If that's not the case, though, it might be time to see a physician who's likely to prescribe one of two things. The first is called H2 blockers. Nerd name is histamine H2 receptor antagonists, because in this case, histamine stimulates the acid-making cells, and these H2 blockers inhibit this acid-making process.
Okay.
So put simply, they're designed to reduce the production of stomach acid, so nipping the issue in the bud, and also reduce the incidence of stomach ulcers. So drugs like Tagamet, Zantac, and Pepcid.
Oh, okay. I've heard of those.
All right.
Yeah.
And according to one drug manufacturer, they do all this with little to no side effects. But if you consult the Google, it says, while considered rare, you'll find constipation, diarrhea, difficulty sleeping, dry mouth, dry skin, headaches, tinnitus, runny nose, to name a few. There's always a laundry list.
Chad's got a secondary
side
career
effects.
in reading off those side effects at the end of the commercials. That was good.
Yep. Yeah. And then finally, if you aren't prescribed H2 blockers, you're likely going to be introduced to PPIs. These are proton pump inhibitors, and they basically block production of acid by blocking the gastric proton pump. Even nerdier, they block the hydrogen potassium ATPase enzyme, both of which are the final step in acid production.
Okay.
So they're longer acting than H2 blockers, and they reportedly stop all stomach acid production. This can have some desirable and less than desirable consequences. But this does make them especially useful in allowing damaged linings to heal. So if you actually have damage to your esophageal or stomach lining, maybe PPIs are a good way to go. So what about the risks of PPIs? Vice.com, always helpful and entertaining, looked at a number of studies found in BMJ, British Medical Journal, and the risks associated with PPIs, this cracked me up, range from decreased nutrient absorption, specifically B12 and magnesium, which for athletes, I mean for anybody is a concern, to a general increase in chance of death, much like driving a car. So also
strange.
included a bit more specific ones, heightened risk of dementia, osteoporotic bone fractures, heart attack, chronic kidney disease, stomach cancer. So if you're considering a PPI, do your homework.
Yeah.
Oh, and withdrawals from PPIs, should you go this route and then ever choose to quit them, are reportedly brutal due to what's called the acid rebound effect. So you tell your body you want acid, then you tell you don't want acid, or you tell your body you don't want acid, then you tell your body you do want acid, and it kind of makes up for lost time.
It gets to work.
Yeah, there's a brutal period that you have to get through where there's an overproduction of stomach acid. To get back on track.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah. So
Not so bad.
So again, I just want to make it clear. It's your responsibility to do your homework. You can't just rely on your physician and expect your physician to know everything about you and to do, have all the proper answers to all these considerations that you can make before time.
I think everything you mentioned, just if you take any of those, go to your doctor and here are all the things.
Yeah.
Some other, I've also had experience with this. So one symptom is after you eat, if you get hiccups, that's like acid reflux.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, I always get hiccups after I eat spicy
Brutal
food.
hiccups in some cases.
Yeah, and I know my wife, and I'm like, it just has a reflux. I'm sorry. And then the other one is this can like scare you. It feels like a flutter in your chest.
Palpitations.
Yeah, and it feels like you're having a heart attack because it's like it feels like your heart's actually
Thumping
beating
out of your chest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had it where it's enough of it where it's like damaged. So I've taken Prilosec, which is great. It's like a 14-day or something treatment. Take that every day. It takes a while, and then it's healed again. And then when the acid comes back, you don't feel it. So it's no big deal. I think I've done that twice in my life when it got bad. The other thing that's kind of funny. I had one vacation. I don't know if you guys remember. This was a while back. I was going to Mexico with my family. I threw away my kids' passports the day before. Like actually, we showed up
Sorry,
at the airport. Yep. So we flew to Phoenix, drove to Tucson, got same-day passports, pushed our flights, went overnight. I got food poisoning at Panera. Threw up all night. Was in the ER really bad. And the doctor's like, okay, what you can't do for the next week is drink alcohol, have fatty foods or spicy foods or coffee.
And you were in Mexico.
Yeah, we're going to Mexico. Like, what's a food in Mexico? It's not fatty, alcohol.
Yeah. Spicy
or coffee.
So you drank a lot of water.
No, I
did it anyway.
I did, I don't know if I did Prilosec, but I had some Tums and I think I was starting Prilosec. And no, actually I had food poisoning, so it didn't matter for that. But just the same kind of idea of you don't want to upset your stomach.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm going to close with,
Yeah.
basically. So to wrap this up and to tie it into acid reflux during workouts or even races, the symptoms, namely heartburn, pretty easy to tie to dietary causes. So At least when it happens infrequently or randomly, not chronically. If it happens chronically, you probably got to think a little outside of that box. In these cases, I typically just pop a couple of Tums, either prior to the workout or on the fly. Almost always does the trick. But I also pay attention to the frequency of this. If I'm over relying on it, I definitely become concerned. But if you pay attention to your diet and know what you think might be triggering the reflux, you're probably not far off base. And it's also worth mentioning that I've had really encouraging results with apple cider vinegar, which oddly, they say a couple tablespoons in water prior to a meal, and there are a number of reasons for doing this. Health and endurance related benefits like increased insulin sensitivity, which means increased glycogen uptake, et cetera. But this is counter to what we might think because it introduces more acid, in particular acetic acid, into the stomach. And in some cases, reflux is caused by an underproduction of acid. I can't even make sense of that. But I do it anyway, and not for these reasons. And since I've started using apple cider vinegar, just a couple spritz on my salad with a Cole & Mason spritzer, a little pump, which is about the only way you can get vinegar on a salad without not completely polluting it. I haven't had an acid reflux or heartburn flare up since then. Again, correlation. I'm not trying to say this has fixed the issue, but there are reasons to eat apple cider vinegar anyway, and if it could positively influence your occurrence of heartburn, then why not?
Interesting.
I used to take shots at it every day because I read it's going to prevent I
was going to mention that.
Prevent food poisoning because I used to get food poisoning like twice a year.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah, for gut flora in that case, right? So,
yeah. But if you think of it, if you do this, like think of the worst tequila you've ever had.
Oh my God.
Multiply it twice.
No, that's in my notes too. Just to elaborate on how horrible it tastes.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's one of the hardest things you can get down. And even mixing it, diluting it in water, that just prolongs the agony.
Yeah.
So I tried the shot. That came right back up.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much science behind it. It's more like they've been doing it since Roman times. Yeah. But
there is no science on it. By the way, I think I found a 2015 graduate study paper, his thesis. That's the only thing I got. Yeah.
So I don't do it anymore. But if you do that, make sure you rinse your mouth because it can eat your teeth. Yep. So that's all I wanted to mention is if you do it, make sure you rinse your teeth.
Correct.
Interesting. So that should, Maddie,
that's all I got.
You got lots of info on there, anecdotes.
But so in general,
you would need.
It shouldn't be just training in general,
right?
That we know.
Really unlikely. I couldn't find anything that linked specifically training and training intensity to increase gastric acid.
I would say for Maddie, it would be the connection. Most likely, the connection in what you eat, and then look for that either the throw up in your mouth. That's easy to tell. But the little pain or hiccups. I think hiccups are like the first sign you don't really correlate them to see what foods you're doing. And then also the kind of drugs. The drugs could be it.
Yeah,
a lot of people take a lot of drugs.
Yep, they do.
Let's go into Tim's question. He says, "Hey guys, I love and am addicted to the podcast and I'm really enjoying the training plans and workouts." Good to hear, Tim. He says, I'm preparing to start a training plan after some time off and have a question about the different goals of different base plans. I'm a pure road rider doing mostly road races and some crits. So I was going to do sweet spot base low volume and he says, but due to curiosity, I looked through some of the other base plans with similar volume and TSS. I noticed the half distance Ironman low volume plan is similar to sweet spot base low volume in some ways, but the Monday sweet spot workout is usually replaced by something that seems very different to a sweet spot workout. For example, like Haku, Shasta, Berryessa. And those, for those that don't use TrainerRoad, they're basically like you spend most of your time around 65% and FTP, and then you'll have occasional 200% sprints.
Yeah, sit training, so sprint intensity training.
Mm-hmm. These workouts look like a lot of fun and make me want to do this plan, and this got me thinking, what is different about the adaptations from the Tri plan compared to the workouts in the Sweet Spot Base plan, and would a road rider who isn't swimming or running, if I don't absolutely have to, see good results from this type of plan? Is it better, worse, or the same as Sweet Spot Base?
Before you go into it, there's a great thing that Tim says, is that he's looking at two plans, and one of them just looks more fun and more motivating. And I say if you have any problems with compliance or sticking with it, just go with the one that looks more fun and that you want to do.
Huge.
Yes, exactly. Because out of all the things that we can do, if you don't work out, there's no other things that we can do to optimize it. It's that is the cake.
Gotta get on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So if there's one that looks more, Chad's going to talk more about it, but we're we're shaping this thing to an oval or a ball or like maybe a rounded square. But if we don't have the clay to do that, like it doesn't really matter. And if you're a big ball, you can get the way to be a square and like crits and stuff.
Yeah, and every end to every plan is improved endurance. So it's not like you're going to go drastically off course if you choose one plan over another. You can train as a triathlete and still compete really well as a criterium racer, for crying out loud.
We see that.
Yeah. You're not going to suddenly get like a 700-pound squat and your aerobics going to go down. That would be a different kind of training.
They're all still endurance plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the focus. The thing is, you can just go about accumulating, building endurance so many different ways. And that's the fun of having numerous different types of training plans. And this is a really good point. Just because you're a particular type of rider doesn't mean you can't train as another type of rider, or that you can't cherry pick workouts out of other plans because they just look fun.
Yeah, especially since most of us listening to this are amateurs, right? Like we aren't paid to do this. We aren't, so it's fun to be able to experiment.
It's all part of the evolutionary process too of training. So you start out, basically anything will work for you, and then over time you figure out the things that do work for you, don't work for you, the things that do motivate you to train, make you hate training, etc.
And sometimes do the ones that you are not good at. Because I think there's a lot of people get stuck in a certain type of training because they do well and then they don't work on the weakness at all. But I had something else to say and I forgot it, so.
I'm just going to read the last bit, and then Chad, you can jump in.
Yeah, I just got miscellaneous points.
Sure,
so
of course.
We can talk back and forth.
He says, for reference, and this is his words, he says, I'm a terrible endurance athlete with, put nicely, he says in quotes, a lot of room to grow. I'm just looking to get stronger and more competitive. So Tim isn't looking at getting, like, for example, like a state championship, national championship, something like that.
Wants to be fitter as an endurance athlete.
Exactly right.
I know what I was going to say. Pros, their motivation is they won't live unless they like do the workouts, right?
Yeah.
So like they can't get any money unless they do the workouts. So that's kind of there for them. Imagine if your whole income was tied to working out.
Just like you show up for work every day, you'd show up.
Exactly, you show up.
It's really hard to take chances and make gambles when you have a paycheck on the line.
I'm saying that pros won't skip workouts due to lack of motivation.
Oh, I got you.
They will do them.
Exactly right.
But us, all the time.
Sure, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you're like, I'm a little tired. That doesn't look so fun.
It's not hard to come by
Tomorrow.
excuses.
How do I push this plan, guys? What do I do?
Yeah, exactly. Chad, I guess if you want to explain a bit of the bike workouts and the plan.
There's kind of old school approach and new science approach, and neither of those terms are quite right because it's all pretty recent science and it all still stands up. There's just, so if you look at strength training, well, first, if you look at what we're trying to improve with Sweet Spot Base, it's strength endurance, and part of that equation is strength. So, yeah, you can accumulate strength in the gym, but that's not really the type of strength that transfers, not directly to cycling. May give you a stronger body, give you stronger postural muscles, make you less wasteful in the way you move your body because your hips are stronger and they can stabilize, etc. Things like that. But the strength gains themselves aren't really the ones that will help you become a faster cyclist. In terms of metabolic adaptation, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
On the bike, strength is another. That's largely what we're after, both with Sweet Spot just at the lower end, and with what he says is more fun looking are the sprint intensity workouts. And in both cases, we're just trying to either increase the number of fibers recruited or condition the fibers recruited, or do both. And again, you can go about it so many different ways. With the sprint training, even though those look like something you would never imagine, especially really any triathlete, maybe a sprint triathlete, but certainly not a half distance or a full distance triathlete, is why am I doing sprint training? Why am I doing all out 20-second efforts? There's a lot of reasons. First off, to increase muscle fiber recruitment. The more muscle that is active, the more muscle that you can kind of work your way through as you gradually fatigue it over long workouts, long efforts, long races.
And the crazy thing is that happens pretty quickly. So your sprint power can go.
It's largely neural.
With a few, yeah, exactly. So with a few sprint workouts, I'm talking to the mountain bikers or crit race or something that need that at the end. You can recruit more of your muscles. You don't actually get more fibers, or they get thicker. Maybe a little bit during this, but the big improvement is just recruiting more, and your brain is better at unlocking them. And which is really, really cool, right? Like that can happen quickly, so you can kind of like sharpen yourself before a race or even a B race by throwing some of these things.
It's just your brain. It's just your brain's communication to your muscles. I mean, it's there waiting to be cultivated. You don't have to do a heck of a lot.
You can feel this yourself. Like I used to play basketball and stuff. Those days you like jump, or when you sprint and you're like, it's just not going. Like, there's more there. And if you were to do
there literally is.
There literally is,
It's sitting right there. You're packing it around.
Exactly. So you can train it.
Yeah.
And one last interesting point on this, I can see a lot of triathletes thinking, well, once again, I'm not sprinting. That's not going to be important. But once again, getting to the root of it, you're talking about muscle fiber recruitment. And when you're talking about a bike leg, one of the things, when you're talking about a bike leg, it's a long time on the bike.
Yeah. And
you are going to be, it behooves you to utilize every bit of fiber that you have.
You cycle through those fibers. And some of them don't necessarily come back, not within the time frame of that workout or that race.
Yep, absolutely.
And then, so that's, and again, I don't like old school to describe this. That's just how we've thought up until a point that Martin Jabala up at McMaster is also put forth the idea that we can derive a similar aerobic training stimulus, not with long hours on the bike, but with really intense, short bursts of activity. So really intense work. And the drive here is that it's the highly intense stimulus. So it's the magnitude of the stimulus. So it's always about disrupting homeostasis, and you can do that in so many ways. And one way that we found in recent years is with sprint intensity training. These little 20-second, 30-second efforts that are all out, and in and of themselves, each one of those has an impact. But when you stack them, even with 4 or 5 minutes recovery in between them, you're not getting full anaerobic repletion. So you're not completely restored for the next one, which draws more heavily on your anaerobic resources, aerobic resources, sends a stronger aerobic stimulus. And your aerobic system starts to see as much of an improvement, if not more, by the end of a succession of these efforts than you would with 3x30 of sweet spot or a 5-hour ride at 60%. Or at least comparable, I should say. Not necessarily more, but comparable for far less time.
Yeah.
So it's the magnitude of the disruption in this case and not the duration.
I know there's probably research in this, but I don't fully believe that me doing 3x30 by sweet spot or me doing 5 sprints will have the same, I'll be able to do the same thing. I don't know if you could...
Not sweet spot. All the studies consist of working for 1 hour, 5 hours a week at 80%. So it is sweet spot-ish. Yeah. So they don't push quite up into that higher realm of more muscle endurance than aerobic endurance. So I don't think sweet spot would stand up quite the same, but surprisingly similarly.
So here's what Pete and I do. Pete turned me on this, and I love it. That on Baxter, or our long aerobic days, we extend the workout during the cool down, and we do 5 all out in the saddle sprints for 10 seconds. And we do this before our C and B crits, where maybe not in our plan, we're not doing any sprinting, but you do that a few times, you get those muscular recruitment. And we don't do it standing up because we don't want to. I probably have no chance of this, but Pete could rip his bike in half. He's a big dude. But doing that, I think in a crit, it's that muscular recruitment, and there's so much time where you have to...
And rate of recruitment.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're in the saddle and you have to accelerate quickly. And I think it actually helps me sprint too. But I think doing it at the end, Chad, what do you think of this? Of 90 minutes of aerobic work or 60 minutes of aerobic work. You're totally warmed up. And then you do it. I think I leave a minute in between each one. To make sure I don't replenish my anaerobic stores.
Yeah, and they're specific to what you're trying to make them. You're not trying to maximize each of those. Rather, you're trying to teach yourself to sprint at the end of something or try to increase recruitment at the end of something that was already fatiguing. So it's not a sprint workout. You're just tacking some sprints onto an endurance workout, and there's a lot of sprint benefit and further aerobic benefit that comes with it.
And for those who want to do it, if you're on a smart trainer, you just go into the device and you switch it from erg mode to standard mode. Then I usually increase the intensity to I don't know, on my hammer, I think I go to 3 or 4 out of, I don't know, there's 7 or 10. I remember how many there is.
Yeah.
And then I go into a little gear and spin easy. And then I kind of click, I get a real low cadence going. I click it into a big gear and then I start and I try to wind it up as fast as I can. Yeah. And then while I'm going, I'm shifting too, to go more and more and more and not pulling the handlebars too. We try to do it just all in the legs.
Yeah, so if you look at stuff like Haku or Berryessa, I've actually done those workouts hands-free. So I'll take my hands off the bars, hold my position, so kind of float there, which does take a bit of core midsection strength, but do those sprints because they're not crazy high. I mean, even 200%, you're only doubling threshold. And for a period or duration that short, that's not a tall ask, a tall order. And I'll do them legit hands-free. And you can, and I think there's a lot to be gained from that too. You're not wrestling your bike. You're not relying on any other muscles than your hips and your legs.
Pete and I go for I think 1,000. Try to hit 1,000 for 5 seconds.
Oh sure,
he does it. He does 1,200, and I do 800. But
one leg
aim
of
for
drills.
1,000.
One leg of drills for
10 second.
You can look at them. I don't know. I think I've done it. I think at least 5 seconds on it, but I don't know. It's hard on a.
I was just going to say, to do 1,000+ watts even for 5 seconds on a trainer's pretty difficult.
We're heavier than the average bear too, though. So I'm 193 pounds this morning. Keep getting bigger. It's all muscle, though, right?
One other thing that it does, yeah, sure.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. One other thing that it does too on the movement economy side of things too. Which is super important.
And strength training, gym strength training reinforces that. Anything that teaches you to just to move better involves those stabilizing muscles and helps you. I mean, you look at the best time trialists, even the best climbers, they're minimally wasteful. They're basically driving those pedals and not a lot of other outside motion is taking place.
Yeah.
And that's a strength adaptation right there.
Yeah.
You can't get that metabolically. Your brain has to be communicating with your muscles.
Yeah, Bernal and Carapaz come to mind with that. Just how smooth and efficient those guys look.
Anyone who looks that supple and fluid.
Yeah.
You can't look at a high level rider. I can't think of one who's not fluid. Even Froome, he like you do his head thing, but he's fluid still.
Yeah, he's got fluidity in there somewhere.
He's got arms out in a weird posture. Maybe he's canted or his head's canted, but the rest of his body moves really well.
Not like some Cat 5 races, right? Like you put those two people by, maybe
you'd see a big difference. So I'm gonna pose 2 questions then at the end of this, Chad.
Okay.
Simple questions. So question 1: can you do the bike workouts from a tri-plan as a cyclist?
Yeah, I mean, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want to.
Should you?
I know. Well, this goes back to the whole motivation thing. I mean, if it gets you on the bike, I don't care what you do.
Exactly.
Well, especially since Tim doesn't have any specific race goals.
Yeah.
Do whatever you
That too.
like.
That offers
any single
a
plan.
high level of flexibility.
Yeah.
Now, the other question is, should you do the bike workouts from the tri-plan, or should you do the bike workouts from the bike?
I mean, you're asking the coach who designed these plans specifically to each type of ridings, to each discipline.
Yeah.
So I think you should, if you have a particular trajectory, if you want to be the best XC mountain biker, follow the XC mountain bike courses.
Yep.
And those plans leading up to them.
Yeah.
But if I was your athlete and I said, hey, I'm looking for general fitness. I know you said sweet spot base, but I'm looking at this tri-plan. It looks more interesting. And you knew I wasn't a high-level athlete and maybe I had some compliance issues. What would you tell me?
Do whatever you want. I mean,
you just say do the tri-plan.
Absolutely, do the tri-plan.
Do whatever you want.
If it looks interesting,
just a text message.
Nate's at Popeyes already.
It's the passive-aggressive coach. Well, you want to say do whatever you want.
But at that point, with a cyclist like that, all I'd be concerned with would obviously initial improvements in fitness, but would be consistency, getting this person on the bike 3 days a week.
That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely. Maxime's question, he says, I've been training consistently for more than a year, and in the last couple of months, I've noticed for some workouts like Mount Good, which is roughly Mount Good +3, that's roughly 4x15 at threshold, just below threshold, but it's threshold.
95.99. Just call it threshold.
Yep. And he says he notices that after those, sometimes he smells ammonia after his workouts. Maxime says, I assume this is due to protein burning for fuel. When I eat a lot of carbs prior to my training, more than I would naturally, this smell is not present. Since I want to change my body composition, and he mentions that the scale gives him 12 to 13% body fat, I would prefer not to eat all those carbs, especially since I'm not starving at all. I eat more than I want to prevent this process. So he says, I'm 65 kilograms. That's about 143 pounds. So small person. And also when he says 12 to 13% from the scale.
Small. I mean, that's you, right?
Yeah. I'm relatively small.
You're average, I would say.
I wouldn't consider you small. I consider like 120, 130 small.
Yeah, but 140s that's a light human. Yeah. Am I living in an alternate universe
right
now?
You're a lean, mean machine.
No, it's a light human. For a male, that's pretty small. But also when he says 12 to 13% fat on the scale, that could be, scales usually have 2 different modes a lot of the time, and it's probably more akin to what you would get from a DEXA than it would be from a caliper test, or it could be, I should say. And usually what we've found, we've done a ton of episodes on this, but using DEXA scans, which are dual x-ray scans that give you a full readout of exactly where the fat is on your body and the exact content and visceral fat, intramuscular, the whole thing. And kind of trying to tie those into traditional caliper tests as well, and the scales that you can buy. And we've usually found that DEXA tends to be roughly double what you see in terms of the percentage.
Not double.
Yeah, it's been double. Yeah.
Oh, maybe for you. For me, it's like I'll be 10% on the scale and 15% on DEXA.
Yeah, that's more in line with what I see.
Yeah. I'm going to pull up in the spreadsheet. I think you're wrong. I think we're double, roughly double.
I don't care about the details usually, so you're probably right.
Yeah, that's for sure. Huh? He says, I'm at 65 kilograms, 143 pounds with an FTP of 313 at 36 years old. My ultimate goal is to get to 5 watts per kilogram, and he's 4.8 now, so that's a very fast cyclist.
Yep.
What would be my best options here? To eat a lot prior to a hard training and starve on easy days, eat a lot and try to change body composition later, or other. And says I need help to optimize my progression toward my goal. Thank you. So this is kind of an interesting one that we can have here in the sense that this is a really fit athlete. And if you're 4.8 watts per kilogram, you are optimized in a lot of ways that most people, even fast cyclists, might not be. So 4.8's a pretty high mark.
Yeah, he's at the upper end of things for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I guess reaching body composition, or ideal with quotes, body composition in a controllable way is kind of how we'll go about this, or the best way possible.
We all have input on this. One thing I can address that's a little more on the science side. Well, it'll all be on the science side, but this is the more nutrition science side. Is when you smell ammonia on your breath, first off, try not to confuse it with acetone, and the two are subtly different. So, and can happen at the same time. Mm-hmm. So when you're burning ketones, or really, let's just call it fat burning, then that smells of acetone. So if you've depleted carbohydrate and you start to have these smells, it could be one of two things. You could be actually in a mild level of ketosis, and you're burning more fat, and you could be burning some protein. Could be one or the other. It's probably a combination of the two, but it's not always the worst thing. I mean, if you burn a little protein, obviously you don't want to do it repetitively. You don't want to do it every ride, but it's not this awful thing. And a lot of the time it is fat metabolism taking place. Mm-hmm. So first, that's one thing. So, and I don't really need to explain some of these other notes without delving too deeply into ketosis, which I kind of want to avoid right now.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people confusing those two things. It's also probably worth saying that it's not worth trying to refine your nasal palate to be able to tell the difference between the two. Yeah, that won't be a pleasant experience.
They're distinctly different. I mean, acetone's what? Nail polish remover, and then ammonia. I mean, you can probably have some
cleaner
on your counter at home.
Yeah. Just picture somebody like
exactly. That's what I mean.
Buy their bike, smelling each.
That's what I'm getting at. Don't do that. Yeah. Don't just sit down and have a smell
yourself. It's usually other people who say, "Hey." Like I've seen people on ketosis, and someone else is like, "You smell like ammonia."
Yeah,
get away from me.
Yeah. So and that seems to affect people differently.
I'm of the opinion, like, we try so hard for protein, like I would not want to ever burn protein as a cyclist when I have an option to just burn carbohydrate with that. But the acetone, yes,
when was the last time that somebody told you or you noticed like ammonia on your breath?
Never.
Yeah,
and it's easily staved off too. I mean, ingest some carbohydrate, it'll go away right then. I mean, you don't even have to come into it fully loaded up. You don't even have to worry about, did I eat enough prior to this workout? You can eat during the workout. You can eat as soon as you start tasting that or smelling it.
Maxime, I answered the question. When I eat a lot of carbs prior to my training, the smell is not present.
But he's also concerned with losing weight. So this is the balance that we all try to
this is what he's trying to hit. Yep.
Okay, you want to go on more before I go on my rant?
Well, yeah, sure.
Okay, cool.
First off, I like to convey, and I've done this with all my clients, is that body composition changes, ones that last, ones that stick. It's a multi-year proposition. It's not going to happen in a season. You can rush it and you can make it happen in a season, but there's also it's fraught with potentially bad things. So if you look at it as and you don't have far to go, you're only talking about minor modifications, but if you're looking at someone who's starting as a Cat 5 and has 20 or 30 extra pounds, they're not going to be their ideal race weight and race performance in a season's time, probably not even 2 seasons time. So keep it in context. If you've got big changes to make, it's going to take multiple seasons. If in like Maxime's case, it doesn't seem like he's got very far to go. So he can probably make it happen far more quickly than what I'm talking about.
And if I could cover basically what happens if a person does reach the numbers in a year, it's usually like, and I think you hinted at that just before, it's not sustainable and it's usually not healthy. And at the very least, it doesn't provide for optimal power output. That's
not at the uppermost end of it.
Yeah.
It's typically a place you get for a peak period of time, and then you revert to something that's maybe not too far off of it.
Yeah. And I've done this when I first, in 2015, I was...
Yes. Please tell your experience.
Yeah.
You had a good story.
Yes. I mean, I was coming into it, rode dirt bikes, all that stuff, and I was bigger. I also had more body fat on me, but I had a lot lot more muscle. I was
How
like,
much did you weigh?
173.
That's crazy to
So,
think of Jonathan at
30
173.
pounds, yeah.
30
Yeah.
more pounds.
That's a lot.
And it slowly started to trickle off, but then in 2014, I basically dropped like 20 pounds, 2014 to 2015, like that's training season. And I was stuck at like 315 watts for my FTP that whole season. I could not budget. And my weight was going down, but then also my performance is going down. Like if you have me do any sort of a long race, I would have been completely done. Even a 90-minute cross-country race, I felt just so weak and thrashed at the end of them. I was worn down, and my power was never going up. Now, the injuries gave me the benefit, we can say, of not being so light anymore, and my weight went back up. And now I'm to the point, though, I've learned a whole lot more about nutrition. I've learned a whole lot more about training and body composition in general and everything else that goes into it. And I find that now I am at a point where if I eat more, so I weigh more. I was weighing like 137 pounds in 2015, right? And now I'm around 145 pounds. And if I stay at 145 pounds, that allows me to eat enough to fuel the training that gives me absolute like big improvements. Like all my training becomes productive toward growth rather than just struggling and banging my head against the wall.
It's super possible and happens enough where people just get set on this particular number. And a lot of the time, power tops out and they feel like I can't elevate power anymore. The only way I'm going to fix my strength to weight ratio is the weight side of things. So I'm going to do everything I can to shed those extra couple of pounds. And it can be really costly in terms of performance and health.
Yes.
And a lot of the times your power isn't actually stuck where you think it is. It is for the moment, but there are ways to address that outside of shedding another couple of pounds on a frame that's already probably needs a couple more, needs a couple extra pounds on it.
If I had like let's just say I was, if I was like a pro athlete, like you see Chris Froome and all these guys eating very restricted diets in different times, or very specific diets probably is the best way to say
they
it.
periodize their nutrition just like
Right.
they do their training.
And for those sort of athletes, when they're doing that sort of thing, we're talking about splitting hairs at the absolute top end of human performance for these guys. And they still eat way more than most of us would probably think. We see like there's a video that came out like a year or two ago, and I think it was like Froome's breakfast, and he basically had like egg whites and like a couple other things.
Egg whites and salmon.
Egg whites and salmon.
And
Which
avocado.
got completely misinterpreted.
And everyone was like, that's what he eats every morning. Chris Froome is always trying to split hairs and eat very little, right? And that was like kind of the assumption. But then you see like the study that came out with, we've talked about this so many times, with the Mitchelton Scott team, where they were taking in a huge amount of carbohydrate during the tour. Yeah. But I guarantee you, if you look at what they take in during training, they're taking in a massive amount. We've seen that anecdotally with being close to professional athletes, that they eat a lot and they fuel their workouts, and they aren't worried about dropping down unless they get to the point where they're like peak season and I can't budge anymore in one regard, so I'm going to do some small refinement. But once again, these athletes are at like the top level. So
you guys have triggered me like 6 times, so I can't.
I know. I see you're over there chomping at the bit.
Everything's I can't. I don't have anything to type right now, so
let me just add one more.
Sorry, everyone.
That's actually a good thing. let me add one more thing. Is that don't lose sight of the fact that recovery requires nutrition too. So you can't just dump a whole bunch of training stress on your body and then you get to your first rest day and you think, oh, I'm not going to eat at all today because I'm not doing anything today. Well, your body's still doing something. Your body's still reeling from the stress you've inflicted on it, and it needs to be nourished in order to fully properly recover.
Hold your horses for one more, Nate. Sorry. That is a really good point, because the question we always think is like, all right, on big days I eat big, on light days I eat light. That's like the assumption that makes sense in your mind. But then not only that are you depriving yourself of recovery, but you have another workout the next day, and it's probably going to be hard. Yeah. And if you come in light, and I've even over the past like week or so, my wife is moving toward like a really low, full-on keto approach. And as a result, I went through for the first few days, I was like, let's try this. And my workouts just went, they got really hard.
It can take a long time to keto adapt.
And now I'm basically getting back to the point where like, I'm just going to make my own carbs and have them over here and bring them in, right? And it's a little bit easier to do it that way. But if you don't fuel your workouts, even on those recovery days, the next day is going to be difficult.
Yeah, loading glycogen and replenishing it is not just a one meal thing. It's like over time.
Yeah, you're raising a tide, so to speak, not a wave.
Okay, where should I start? First, the Team Sky thing.
Yeah.
I think partially the information that they put out is strategic.
They're trolling.
So when Chris Froome's like, all I'm eating is that.
Yeah.
And then they have a sports nutritionist who he's been on some podcasts, and he always talks about fuel for the work required. People hear that and they see the picture of Chris eating salmon and they go, I'm not eating any carbs in that. But then he himself says, easy days, 6 grams of carbs
which is
per kilogram.
That's a ton.
Yes.
That's more than probably everyone listening is doing here. And then on the hard days, it's like 10 to 12.
Yeah.
So when he's saying fuel for the work required, he's like more than everyone else is doing. It's not a salmon. And maybe that one day.
In that case, too, he was probably sending him into a depleted ride.
It's what I was thinking. That one day he was doing a depleted ride.
Yeah.
And Chris is a smart guy. And it's probably like, this is going to make my competition think I'm doing this all the time. and they're going to do it. So I think a lot of people, based on the evidence we have, like you take the one picture and you think he does it all the time, like you said, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Based on what their own people say, he's eating a whole bunch of carbs all the time.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And yes, they are doing some rides fasted, but in general, they're still eating a lot. And everyone who gets embedded with teams who actually looks at what they eat, all of them have reported at the highest level that they eat a ton of carbs.
Yes.
I can't think of, someone should put it out there, but think of someone on a World Pro Tour cycling team that's good.
That's currently successful.
Yeah, that's like eating no carbs.
Yeah.
Can't think of one.
Yeah.
Second, this is a discussion in the forum. There's an awesome thread of like 5 watt per kilo riders. How did you get there? And people are going through, and someone made a great point is people get stuck on that 5 watt per kilo number, but really like you add a good sprint and a good 1 minute power and some repeatability.
Yep.
And that is way better than getting to a magic 5 watts per kilo
There are more
number.
dimensions to any rider. You can't just look at your strength to weight at your FTP.
So maybe losing weight for this rider could actually make them lose more races unless they're doing hill climbs. If you're a hill climber, it's all about watt per kilo.
That's a really good point. It's not there isn't a direct tie to winning more races.
And I have raced against people at this same 4.8 when I was like 3.9, but I had a higher FTP with good 1 minute power and some tactics, and I would beat them all the
juniors.
time.
Juniors are like 6 watts per kilogram.
Yeah. I've touched. I mean, just like ever so briefly, 5 watts a kilogram, and had some good races for sure in that brief period of time. But I race better in general when I hover around 4.5, 4.6. So chasing that number became like its own end, and I lost sight of. I didn't actually lose sight of it, but people do. They lose sight of what they're actually after, which is improved performance, better race results, PRs.
Yeah. This is why I've been lifting more weights recently, as everyone can tell on the.
Just
joking. You can't. I'm like skinny guy who still looks skinny, so you can't tell at all.
You can tune in on YouTube and join us every week. Usually Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, by the way.
But for me, looking back at like the races, they're usually decided by a wheel length in the kind of crits that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And a little bit more. If I can get a poppier sprint, that would be awesome. And
Your
having
weight's
a little more
matter less in that moment.
Yeah, having a little more upper body strength.
We haven't even broached the possibility of strategy and tactics and their influence on your racing.
Exactly.
We're just looking at the conditioning and performance side.
Another option that you could have, Maxime, is that you didn't put down. Let's see what your options were: eat a lot prior to hard training and starve on easy days, eat a lot and try to change body composition later. You could, like Amber Pierce said it great in here. She said, don't diet on the bike. That's the one time, unless you're going for some like mitochondrial adaptions with
fasted training.
Yeah, fasted training.
2 days.
That shouldn't be done with Mount Good. Is it Goody or Good? Whatever.
Just good.
It shouldn't be done with 4x15 at threshold. That's not the day to do.
to go light on the food, not at all.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's a lot of work.
You have plenty of other time during the day to remove. Let's say you're eating, 400 calories. That's like you could shave that off the rest of the day and still have the same caloric intake during the day, but have a great workout, not burn protein, have a little more muscle, you have a higher basal metabolic rate. You're going to burn more. That means you're going to burn more generally throughout the day. You'd be great. The carbs get such a bad rap. Like if I eat a carb, I'm going to get fat. You could shave it off everywhere else, but what Chad said too, still, focus on recovery. Also, you could try eating a little bit more and increase your volume.
Yep.
Like that is a great way. So, Jonathan, this has happened to you. You eat more, it's like not hard,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's weird. It's like you're cheating. Like I calibrated my power meter 5 times during yesterday's workout.
Yeah, you think
between
it's
every
broken.
one because I was like, it's too high.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was calibrated the same every time.
I've had the same experience, and then you look back, you look in the forum too, lots of people say it, where they go from kind of starving yourself, and the same thing, I see the scale go up, I'm like, oh, I'm just not going to eat. I'm going to skip breakfast, and you're going to do all these things, and you try doing a workout, and it's a spiral.
Yeah.
And it's not actually a good thing. And maybe you lose some weight, but it's muscle weight, and then your FTP goes down, or your top end goes down. And if you're road racing, it's like probably 5 to 10 minutes that decide the race.
Yeah.
Right? It's not who can do 5 watts per kilo for an hour.
Yeah. Can I add a point really quick
please do.
to
I'm
his
gonna
option where he
organize
says,
my thoughts.
yeah, he says eat a lot and try to change body composition later. I would challenge that, and I would say eat a lot, train a lot. First of all, pair those two together, and your body composition is going to happen over time.
Probably take care of
Like
itself.
yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the time we think
That's another reason I
go ahead,
recommend
Chad.
the multi-year. That's it, because it does handle itself. You don't really even have to consciously address weight loss.
And I
body
feel like
comp
when
change.
you try to you focus on it, you're like Lenny from Of Mice and Men. You kind of like you smash it, right? Like and you crush the whole thing. Like once you start focusing so much on trying to do that, you end up, I think, making sacrifices that cost your performance. Whereas if you just focus on, the way I kind of look at it as really like my schedule is the biggest constraint for me right now in terms of training. If I didn't have that, I would be eating more so I could train more. And that would be like my goal. Just eat more so I can train more. Eat more so I can train more. And I would continue to ramp that up until I found a spot where basically I was, balancing out.
couldn't recover.
I couldn't recover.
Yeah, and it's definitely relative to the type of work you're doing too, because if you're just going out and logging long rides at 50, 60, 70% of threshold, you can get away with a lot more dietary flexibility. I mean, you can starve yourself and still do quite a lot.
Yeah.
But you start dipping into sweet spot work. I mean, I've done my fair share of 2 starved sweet spot training and fully fueled sweet spot training. And the difference is night or day. And my motivation is obviously different. The response I get from the training is obviously different. I mean, I ate a ton going into Hawaii, and that was like a 4-week block of sweet spot. And I had a great trip to Hawaii. I mean, rode well. Last year, kind of the opposite, and I sucked.
Yeah. So I guess that the point that I would get to with that is that if you give yourself that time and you focus on eating more and training more, your body composition will change.
Yep.
It will.
That's a great point. As long as you're not eating like Popeyes, sorry Popeyes, and like cinnamon
You have to
rolls
be
and
sensible.
stuff. If you're eating like whole foods and stuff,
Yep.
and you increase your training, your body's going to get to a pretty natural point of like optimal body composition for you.
Yes.
You're not going to suddenly balloon
That
up
may not
20%
look like
fat.
you. It may not look like some other person that you see. It may
Yep.
be different. And that's like that's the thing with optimal body composition. It's optimal for the demands that you place on your body.
You think you need to look like Tyler Hamilton.
Right.
like-
and we don't.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't. That doesn't mean you're going to look
Well,
super
the
skinny.
quality of your food, the quality of your carbohydrate is always a concern, but do get comfortable with the fact that we are endurance athletes, and we have a lot more, a much greater area for forgiveness, I guess.
Yeah.
With carbohydrate. We use carbohydrate. I mean, when they talk about low carbohydrate diets and carbohydrate is the enemy, that's typically with people who aren't doing any work. If you're sedentary and you spend your day sitting behind a desk and you don't exercise, you need to take a different approach to your carbohydrate intake than endurance athletes do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Nate, do you have anything else to add?
I think I got in, but I'll just jump in, interrupt you guys.
when you
Other
think of it later.
questions? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just kidding.
Next one's from Bernie. I would love it if this was actually Bernie Sanders, but I don't dare read it in his voice. That would be hilarious, though. I want him to be a bike
you
racer
do
and
that?
send us questions. Oh, heavens, no. That would not be hilarious, though. Says, I'm a sprinter who was recently in a Cat 5 road race on a course with rolling hills. I was much slower than the peloton going up and much faster going down, so I was washing through the group. And I think that what he means by washing through the group is moving front to back, basically, as it was going through the hills.
No, back to front.
Or, yeah, back to front, I should say. And kind of
both
recycle.
ways, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, watching.
I had one teammate who got into a 3-man breakaway, so at that point, instead of staying to the side of the road at the front of the bottom of the next hill, I went to the left and climbed slow but out of the saddle, much to the frustration of everyone trying to go around me. I heard one person say he's blocking, but most of the others complained that I wasn't, and he says in quotes, holding my line. I think there are many memes about people being yelled at for holding their line or not holding their line on the internet. So, and I certainly did go into a lot of small holes when moving up the back, but that had me curious. What are the UCI rules with regards to blocking? How far can you go to dissuade the chase? Is there something wrong with me that I enjoyed doing this? So
There's a lot here.
Yeah, first things first, I'm going to try to paint like a visual picture for what happens, at least from what I can understand.
Can we address the elephant in the room first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, Bernie.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You know what I'm going to say, right?
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
Everyone hears it. But Bernie, if you're a Cat 5 sprinter, there's like a whole meme around that.
Yeah, there is, for sure, yeah.
You probably just need to increase your FTP because there's probably no Cat 5 sprinters out
exactly.
I don't really think you get to choose your phenotype when you're a Cat 5. I think you're still trying to figure that out.
Oh, yeah. And
so don't pigeon. You can Google the meme.
Yeah, for sure.
There's one
Ralph
with
Wiggum. With Ralph Wiggum. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's in we have a cycling meme
you can
post
see it
on the forum, which
fantastic.
is, if you want to laugh, go do cycling memes on the forum. Just go through that for like an hour.
It's fantastic.
It is hilarious. But General and Bernie, like Chad's point, don't pigeonhole yourself into that.
Yes.
But thinking that you're going to be that way forever.
So it sounds like what happened is so he had a teammate go up the road. So like a good teammate, Bernie was like, hey, I need to help my teammate out who's up the road. Mm-hmm. So when this group is this washing machine motion, basically repetitive motion is what he's getting at with that, is happening every time they go over and like up a hill and down a hill. Where when they go up a hill, he moves back through the field. And then when they go down the hill, he's moving to the front of the field. And rinse and repeat. So when his teammate gets up the hill, he doesn't just kind of fall back out of the way and find his place back in the group, but he actually, it sounds like what he does is kind of cut across the front of the field as he's doing that and disrupts the movement of the field, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So kind of a movement across.
There's two. So one, if you are in it, if you're trying to like float through the peloton and like back and forth, like a wagging of a like an eel or something.
Sure
that is horrible. Don't ever do that. That's downright dangerous.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's just get that and say that.
For sure.
Now, I think with the rest of this, let's just assume he's just somewhere in the peloton keeping a straight line and people are yelling at him for blocking.
Yeah, so if that's the case and you're just keeping your pace and you're falling back through the group, sorry, but nobody can really get upset at you. As long as if you're holding your line, they cannot get upset at you.
Yeah.
They will, but they shouldn't be.
Go as slow as you want to. It's called going backwards. We've all been there.
This is on
a skill that we all have.
Well, I think we're going to
worked hard on that one these last couple seasons.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to talk about all the ways to help your teammates, but just this, it's on video. We do an air center crit, and it's probably, I don't know, 3 to 4 lanes wide of like cars.
Very wide.
And someone, I think you were off the front.
Yeah.
And I was on the front of it, of like the peloton chasing. I was doing like 200 watts, but I was shaking my head and like down low.
Selling the effort.
And someone's yelling, someone goes by and like, quit blocking, like, or he's blocking us. I'm like, we could all line up and ride shoulder to shoulder in this group and be fine
on that road.
Yeah, we could go 20 ride and we'd be fine. Yeah. Like that is not blocking.
No, blocking is basically there's only one spot where you'd be able to move forward and you are plugging that hole, so to speak.
Which is a great, you can totally do that too. Especially
it's a viable tactic. It's a great tactic.
I don't know, where do you want to start, Jonathan?
I want to start with the UCI rules. So I went through the rule book with a search. I didn't read the whole thing. I don't wish that upon anybody. But going through that, there isn't a single rule against actual blocking. Nothing like that. There are rules against unsportsmanlike conduct. There are rules against unsafe riding. Mm-hmm. All of those, however, are left up in almost every case. They're left up to the commissaire to be able to decide whether that was justified or not. So that complaint has to be lodged or that has to be witnessed. And then
commissaire and the riders you're riding against. I mean, this does not build the sort of reputation that's going to benefit you down the road.
Depends on what you're doing. Yeah, and so there's kind of like things that are considered like that's just tactics and things considered no bueno.
Is a reckless rider.
I just did a Masters race this year, person unnamed, but they were on the front. They didn't want to pull the front. And instead of just slowing down, they jammed on their brakes while I was on their wheel.
Can't do that.
I almost crashed.
Unsafe.
I know it's on video, and
dangerous.
I was like, "What are you
do that.
doing?"
You should lose your license for things like that.
Do not jam on your brakes to try to like. And it was a sudden one. It wasn't just like I'm going to slow down.
This is not a contact sport.
They didn't want me on their wheel, so they.
Yeah. That's something that's entirely worth somebody getting upset about or calling them out on.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then it's fighting words right there. Fighting actions.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into his next question. Kind of how far can you go to dissuade the chases? Actually, his last question is: there's something wrong with me that I enjoyed this? If you enjoy peeving people off, getting them a little upset like that, I mean that's your bag. So that's fine. But as far as how far can you go to dissuade the chase, let's talk about things that we would do to help a teammate. One thing, and actually we have a video coming out on this pretty soon. So Pete and I just recorded a couple race analysis videos yesterday where I was in an Omnium. And so a three race point series. So 3 races, 3 days in a row versus a TT. Next road race, final one was a crit. So the tactical one at the end was what decided it, and we had a points battle to shake out. So there's a lot of stuff that you'll see in that video that I think you'll really enjoy, where we go over that. And then we also did a separate video on the breakaway itself because that was super interesting. But I mean, first things first, if your rider is up the road in front of you, or if a teammate is up the road in front of you, last thing you want to do is chase him down. You don't want to do that. I think we all understand that. But
we all do not understand that.
That's actually a very good point.
I was sometimes when I train, I watch our full race videos that we put out, and I was watching one of the Cat 4 races I did last year, and Bryce Lewis, who was our producer before, I didn't attack, and he chased me that whole time. And he's my employee. I was like, what are you doing, Bryce?
There's a difference between understanding the theory and that it is good and then actually putting it into practice.
So many times you see teammates chasing down teammates.
And being clear on what teammate means, because it's pretty loosely defined in some cases, especially the lower categories.
Strange
because it's a club.
Yeah.
Well, it's a club, and you got 15 of you, like, are we teammates or we just all want to win?
Yeah. And strange alliances form too in the middle of a race, you know, and also fall apart. So it's always kind of.
So generally, don't chase down your teammate.
Yes, generally. Now, if you do have a rider up the front, try to be toward the front of the group that is basically next in line behind the rider that's up the road. And the reason for that is you want to influence it, and you want to influence it negatively. But you can do that totally safely.
Yep.
So ways that you can do it, Nate, you already have your hands ready. Yeah. So you're ready to go.
Well, there's 2 things to do. So if you have your responsibility, you have a rider off the front, right? You can either, and you can do both these same times. One is if anyone bridges, you should be on their wheel. And if they are going to bridge up, you're not going to do any pulls. You're just going to stay on their wheel. What that does, 2 things. One is if they do get there all the way, then you have 2 teammates in the break. But 2, it also dissuades that person from bridging up because they look back, and even if it's just the 2 of you, they're like, oh, I don't want to take.
They're doing. They're towing you across.
Yeah, I don't want to take Bill or Susan all the way up to the breakaway, because then they're going to be fresh and they're going to have 2 people, and they sit up and like, You do that every single time, especially if you have 2 different teammates where you can. You can't be at the very front when you're doing this.
Right.
This is why I'm kind of mentioning these 2 different things.
Yep.
You got to be back a little bit because you have to see that slingshot. And if it's attack off the front, you can usually it's not enough speed differential. You can just go and hook on, especially because sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah.
It's so easy to pop. If you're a poppy person, that should be your job, because you're not going to have to sustain the power for the bridge because you're going to be in the draft. Josh Rennie locally is really good at this. He's poppy, but doesn't have the best sustained threshold power. I am not poppy, but I have to sustain threshold power. So when I go jump off, he can pop onto my wheel with a 5-second 1300 watt sprint. I can't get away from him, and then I can't drop him because he's in my draft.
He just holds in.
Yeah, and that is so annoying. So annoying, but it's great tactic. You're going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to your point of having multiple teammates to do this is so helpful. If it's just down to one rider, a lot of the time a pack can beat you up to the point where you're constantly trying to chase these things down, and then what happens is the matches just burn out, and then somebody does that one move and it's a bridge too far and you can't do it. But having those other teammates is so helpful. You know?
That's when it's like slower. That's kind of like if you see the pack slow down, like bridges are gonna happen. So be in that position.
Yeah, cover, don't assist.
If there is if it's like a fast pack, or like you're in a bridging group, or even if you're in a breakaway and you don't want the breakaway to happen, because you don't like your chances, or there's like a great sprinter in there and you don't think it's going to happen, you can sit into the rotation, and then when it's your turn, just don't pull as hard as everybody else.
Yeah.
And there's a great way to do it, especially if people get confused, where you're like, you still rotate, but you're pulling like, everyone else is doing 400 watts and you're doing like 250, and it slows it down. And then everyone else starts to not pull as hard.
You have to be pretty coy about it, though, or people will just immediately go around you. You have to find that sweet spot where you're going fast enough to make people think, oh, he's trying, he's working, versus this idiot just slowed down too much.
Yes, and we're going to blow around him or try to kick him out.
Or her.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll ditch that rider quickly.
I've heard that theory, but every time I've seen riders do that, it just messes it up. And so what you're...
It's always disruptive.
To counter it, what you do is there's another jersey in this line. If you're the rider behind that jersey, when that person is turned to pull, just pull right past them, and everyone should do that. Like we're pretending like this person's in the line.
You should assume that anyway. If you know that rider has a teammate up the road, you know that rider's not going to be of any use to you.
Well, yes, right. But I've never seen that happen in any race that I've done.
I've seen it happen a ton.
Oh yeah,
like
a ton.
I've never seen the group actually do it correctly. Okay, so maybe this is in 5, 4, 3, and 1, 2, 3 races.
Yeah.
They all just go. The person gets on front for like 15 seconds, and people raise their hand and go, "What? You're blocking me!" And like they start yelling, and then you're like, "Okay, let's get this going again." And it's so disruptive, but you can totally counter it.
I can think of many instances where I did this very thing last year.
Most of my racing was NorCal Masters 1, 2, 3 racing, and I saw awesome demonstrations of what we're describing right now all the time. So much so that I could rely on it. If I had a rider up, I knew I didn't have to work. I could either sit on the back, or I could expect the pace line to move around me when it was my turn to pull.
So here's why that's so important. And we cover this actually in the video that we'll be releasing in the coming weeks. But a lot of the time we think that to be in a breakaway or anything else, we have to be substantially faster than the group that's ahead of us. But you don't. It's just a matter of 1 mile an hour more, and that 1 mile an hour more, you're going to catch them.
Yep.
So when you go to the front, and then if you put out 0 watts, you're going to get kicked out of the back of that thing, and you got a lot of enemies in that little group that you have when you get to the front. But if you put out 250 watts, you drop the speed, let's just say, from 26 to 24 for a short little bit of time.
It has to be subtle.
And it's a small thing, but what it does is it just makes that breakaway, it makes that bridging attempt 5 to 10 minutes longer. I don't know, insert whatever time. And that's all you need in order to help your teammate out. It's fine if
you're doing what's realistically possible to help your teammate.
Yeah. If your bridging group that you don't want to be successful gets within 20 feet of your teammate at the end, that's still a success. Like, it doesn't mean that like you have to keep them out of sight. It's still a success if you get very close, but then your teammate still wins. So it's a subtle way, and I think that it's the death by 1,000 cuts sort of thing. It's a really important thing to learn, but it's hard to remember because in your mind you think I just have to be so much faster or I have to be a lot slower. There's nuance to it.
I had a different experience with you guys, but people being a lot slower messes it up. Mike's bike's at Bariani, which is a really long road race, so it's like 89 miles in the Cap 3 with some hills. People get tired. They had a rider up the road, very strong rider, and then we actually got neutralized, so like we had a very big gap, and me and this other guy are trying to pull it back. Start pulling, and then like I wave my elbow and look back. There's 5 Mike's Bikes jerseys lined up behind me.
Yep.
And they just, they're riding easy, under 200 watts. And no one else, everyone's tired. They don't want to like pull through 5 people and do it. And they're just so used to riding in the pack. And they're already tired. That Mike's just doing that disrupts the flow enough.
Yeah, and that's
we all throw up our hands.
Super dominant presence too.
It is
5 other riders back
maybe
there.
It was 4, but it was
still
enough that
3 would be enough to dissuade me.
It was rough. It was great tactics.
It wouldn't dissuade me. It would make me choose a different tactic. I'm not going to use this pace line. I'm going. I'm going to try to get across on my own. It either works or it doesn't. And maybe they do, and you tow a guy across, but you're across.
Yeah, it's what you can do.
They all covered me.
It's a great spot to be in, and not just
a great spot for them.
And like you said, Nate, or like we were both talking, there's a lot of different ways to disrupt a chase or disrupt a group like that. You can either just sit on and just be back there and do what you do, or you can take the subtle approach and try to do it, or you can also do the thing like, for example, every time you come through a pace lines thrive on smooth and consistent power. And when you come through and you surge, or you even surge not at the front, but you surge at different points and just vary your speed, that's going to frustrate a lot of people. And if anybody's on the limit, that little surge that they have to deal with is going to put them over their limit, and it's really going to cost
a lot of ways to be disruptive.
So your teammate's off the front too, and you have a small pack chasing, just not getting in the rotation. That can also frustrate people enough. Well, they will stop pulling because either they're frustrated or they're smart and say, hey, this person's going to be fresh.
Yes.
And I don't want to bring this teammate up. So that's another thing you can do.
Yep. One thing that I can think of, too, is the fake attack, so to speak. Much like fishing, bike racers tend to be not so intelligent many times once they get on the bike, right? Like they can be a very intelligent person otherwise. Then once we get on, we get foggy brain.
Less and less so
smart.
as you get tired, yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny how in those moments, especially, so it's a double-edged sword to be a marked rider. It's nice because you can influence the race with whatever you do, but it's also bad because you never get to sneak away. But if you're a marked rider or anything like that, you can just drag that field out with false attacks and make them surge and catch, and you can find out who would be the rider that would want to chase onto you.
But are you saying do that when someone's off the front?
Yeah. So actually, this was one of the races that we did this year. I think that we have a full race of it. You can check on our playlist that we have on YouTube, where I think Pete was up the front, or somebody was up the front. Maybe it was you that was up at the front. We were just chasing wheels for a bit, but then we started launching our own attacks. You were a ways up the road. We knew that you were
couldn't
safe.
catch me.
We couldn't catch you. So then we were launching our own, and they were not attacks where we would ever extend it into a bridge, but they were hard attacks, and we'd keep it going for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and all the key players that were eager to get up to Nate would have to work really hard to latch on to Pete and I, and then we'd shut it down. And then they were also tired from doing that we would just kind of rinse and repeat.
I think that's like you were kind of like weakening the field.
Exactly.
But not
because you didn't want them to bridge up to you, right?
If I was within distance, I would say don't do any fake attacks. It's going to speed up the field.
Yeah. But we're talking about all possibilities here.
I'm just I'm adding context for everybody listening.
Yeah. One other, I guess, on the outside of the group side of things too, it's your line choice, even in a lot of spots. If it's a technical course,
or not even a technical course, sometimes just taking the long way around. So
people follow it.
Yeah, people totally do it at the air center. There's like the road's so wide that if you go wide the whole time around, you're adding like 5 seconds per lap.
Yeah, it's long.
So if you're in the front and you just start doing the long way around, everyone just starts following you because that's what you do as a cyclist, and you can add an extra 100 yards per lap.
It's a good idea on a wide course.
But don't take dangerous lines.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't break and tight pivots or something like that into a turn. Nothing like that.
Just don't. The fastest way is when you take like corner to corner. You take in a straight line. You can kind of go extra wide each time.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. Or another thing that you can do, and this can definitely get dangerous, so it's riding a bit of a fine line here, but let's say the course has really rough asphalt and it's really bumpy in a spot, but it's not to the point where it's dangerous or anything else like that. If you want to dissuade people, just ride the bumpy line, and if they follow you, that's fine. But ride that bumpy line, and it's going to tire them out or make them upset, so then they'll end up doing more work, and it's
watch out for your tires, though.
Yes.
You can gutter them, or you can gutter yourself, and a lot of people aren't comfortable being in the gutter. So if they want your wheel, they're going to have to either take that chance, or they're probably going to give up the wheel.
One thing I want to add to that too is if you have any sort of like on our weekly crit course that we have here, we have like they park semi-truck trailers on the course, and don't be the rider that tries to use an obstacle like that you would run into as some sort of like
if you're not looking up.
I've seen that like where we're echeloned against, and then like basically it's a decision where you lock up your brakes and or you hit. Don't do that. Don't do unsafe stuff.
Nothing unsportsmanlike.
You can echelon against a curb or like the course.
That's one thing.
But it's when things pop out that other riders aren't going to know about. Don't echelon that like a car parked dirty on the course.
Don't push them into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's not safe.
Another thing that is really good to help your teammates, and Jonathan and I have done this before. If you have this works best in a technical course or in a finish, or even just starting a breakaway. But if it's strung out and you have some riders, if I am behind Jonathan, I just stop pulling. So like there's an acceleration, I just let a gap open, and then he goes away. I think we have videos. I've done that. We should do our own video of just that, Tucker.
Yeah, we should put it together.
I think I've done it 5 times where you or Pete gets in the breakaway for the win, because when it gets really fast, I just sit up for a second. And then, like, people don't respond for 3 or 4 seconds. The gap is then huge.
Yeah, you don't just sit up. You just let off the gas a bit.
Exactly, yeah. I do my little thing like I'm going fast with my head. And everyone's like,
you don't.
Nate's a great draft.
Yeah.
Going from 400 to 300 watts, 200 watts, and suddenly...
I just did a 200, and you're going 700 watts.
You're the body that's breaking the wind, and you're the body that's in front of them. Yeah. A lot of people don't want to go around that.
Exactly. And they might even be able to see because I'm a big rider.
That too. Sure.
It just takes a few seconds, and then it happens.
Yes.
And then... The only thing that's lame is it becomes a very boring race if no one wants to chase.
Yeah.
And just kind of sit together and be like,
it becomes a race for second or third or whatever.
Yeah.
It can still be boring if no one wants to do anything. It's like 45 minutes of easy pedaling.
That course has a high likelihood of becoming boring.
Yeah. So there are plenty of things you can do.
And we've talked a lot about assisting a teammate, but the hold your line comment always cracks me up. I mean, we've all obviously seen American Flyers, and the people just love to say that. Yeah. And along those lines, not exactly that though, is there's this too common assumption that the rider in front of you or whoever is in the wind or leading, even in a criterium, like a technical criterion, that rider in front is going to choose the best line every time. So very not the case. And the one that always comes to mind is Nevada City, because Nevada City bombs down a hill and then it takes 2 hard left-handers. And how you enter the first left-hander sets up the second left-hander. People cannot wrap their brains around that. They're always cutting the corner on the first one like it's the only turn, like it's a single 90-degree turn, and then you're just going to roll for a while, when in fact you have to set up for another even harder left turn. So how you set up for it is the widest outside line you can get, but nobody takes that line. So everybody ends up following the person who's taking the wrong line simply because they assume that rider knows what's up.
Yeah.
When you be that one guy who doesn't hold his line or her line, gets outside, takes that wide line, eventually other riders catch on to it or they don't. But in any case, that was a make or break strategy in the case of that race.
Yep.
But if you just blindly follow that rider in front of you, you're just hemorrhaging time and effort on that second turn, which sets up the next uphill.
The rest of it, yeah.
The next uphill, you can sail up half that uphill if you take those
Sets up your
2
lap,
turns right.
Really, because then that's the effort that you put out.
And I'm being very specific with that course, but the point is the rider in front of you doesn't necessarily have the best line in mind.
So if you take a different line than the rider in front of you, and letting the lower categories, they yell, "Hold your line!" When really it's just the person in front of you took a bad line, and you're taking a great line.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they yell.
Yeah.
So this is what I consider to be like one of my best strengths, and it's from skiing and from racing motocross. Those 2 things, where you'd think that motocross you just have a power, so you have a motor, so you can just power through whatever you do, and you can take the turn how you want. It's entirely about line choice, just like any racing endeavor is. And when you look at Formula One, MotoGP, cyclists should watch that, and they should look at what they do. You'd be surprised
different
on
circumstances
how
too.
many apexes, meaning the center point on the inside of the turn, these Formula One drivers intentionally miss, and they go wide around because they're painting the smoothest line around that entire track to be able to maintain momentum. And it takes a lot to be able to think outside the race, I would call it, and to think outside of what's going on in front of you. And the best motocross racers that you will see are always they have like a tie to be able to feel what the fastest line is and know what that fastest line is, and they don't care what somebody else is doing in front of them. They don't care what the berm looks like or the rut looks like in front of them. For cycling terms, they don't care where the pothole is. They don't care where the cone is. They don't care where any of that stuff is. They see outside those lines.
Yeah, and it reminds me, and I have no details on this, so I'm going to botch it. I'll paraphrase what I remember, but it was a youngster in a NASCAR type race who was the only rider amongst all of them who knew the rain line, would take the rain line. Everyone else was still sticking to the dry line, having to slow down, scrub off speed, or in and out of every turn, whereas this one youngster took the rain line throughout the course, or throughout the entirety of the course, and ended up winning the race.
Yeah.
What's a rain line?
Yeah, well, basically you're talking about a spot where enough riders have driven so that it dries out and stays dry. Then the rest of the course is wet and sloppy. And you think, oh, no, I don't want to do that. But he's just thinking, I just want to be the fastest around this course that I can be. So he was. He doesn't adhere to just that single rule.
Just
where
thinking
everyone else
slightly
is
outside of the box. I mean, you consider it from his perspective. You're coming into this, bunch of veterans, you're the newbie, and you have the defiance to say, that's not the best line, you guys. You go your own way, and he made it work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an extreme example of what I'm describing. But again, person in front of you may not have the best line.
You see it all the time in cross.
Yes.
Never in cross do they go, hold your line, Vanderpool.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? You took a
changing it all
different
over.
line.
We admire it. when we
Exactly,
see
we
it.
admire it.
Yeah.
I also think, there's way, way, way more yelling the lower the category you're in.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
is
just
true.
watching the
It's like
videos
a chorus.
again. Left side.
It's amazing.
Slowing.
Yeah.
Like,
But why are they yelling these things
left
out?
turn. It'll be a crit. We'll do that lightning 100 times. Left turn.
It's like, we got it, guys.
Yeah, we got it. Like,
we
I
don't need
understand
it.
safety, and like it is great to call things out, but yeah,
When you're
there's
doing
just
a race.
a point where there is
Yes.
you've done it enough times, you're taking a left here.
Yeah. Last 2 points that I want to make on this is it's hold your line is usually you're not taking the line that I want. That's an important thing. So hear that when you hear that, so to speak. And then with Cat 5 racing, and for all of us, it behooves us to all take this perspective, but especially it's prevalent down in Cat 5 as many times if they're pointing the finger, that whole like finger pointing at you, one pointing at somebody else, 3 pointing back at you sort of a thing. If you point at somebody, you got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. almost every time, or you're doing the politician hand thing. If especially in Cat 5 racing, if you're finding fault with somebody's racing, chances are you're committing plenty faults yourself. You're all kind of learning through this whole thing. Now, if somebody's doing something genuinely unsafe and taking your line, that's one thing. But if somebody is just holding their line and going slower than you, or taking the line that you don't want, don't call them out for it.
Chances are you're not the one racer out there who has it figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Chad. Kyle's question says, I love the podcast. I'm watching your videos on YouTube. Thanks, Kyle. Says, I'm new to cycling and plan on trying road racing, forgive me, in 2020. I do not have access to a power meter yet due to financial issues. However, I do have speed and cadence sensors. My question is, what is the best way to build some base fitness? I want to give myself the best opportunity to stay in the pack and not get dropped in my first race. So first thing I would do is listen to what we just talked about there in terms of, trying to be efficient racing and understanding how a pack works, and check out our race videos.
Yeah.
Race analysis videos. You can see those on YouTube as well.
That can save you like 50 watts in a race just by being smart. I mean, even more than that. In tons of positions.
He says, I want to train the right way, but don't know what to do with what I have. I'm lost in what to do next. Please help. From Kyle Gomez. So first things first, he says he doesn't have a power meter yet due to financial issues. However, he does have speed and cadence sensors. That means with TrainerRoad, you can use virtual power. And that will give you the same exact benefits of training with a power meter, but you won't have to shell out the cost for a power meter.
You just can't compare those numbers to other people.
Yeah, so when your FTP is 200, it may not be 200 to your friend's 200, right? So it'll be different.
We want consistent training, but it's not like accurate.
Yeah, precise, not
accurate. Yeah.
And then outside of that too, you can also do outside workouts without a power meter with TrainerRoad. When you click on a workout in your training plan and you select outside, you can make it an RPE-based workout instead of power. So then you can have RPE-based goals for when you go outside and do your intervals outside too. So you can follow a whole entire training plan inside and out without a power meter, which is pretty neat, Kyle. So you're not disadvantaged in this case. I guess on the base fitness side of things, that's what he really wants to build. Chad, I guess fundamentals of base training. What are the goals or objectives with it?
Yeah, when I design a base plan, I'm basically looking at all the principles, the basics. We want economy, we want leg speed, we want the ability to generate a lot of force, we want to be able to pedal quickly, we want to be able to change power outputs quickly. Obviously, you want to cultivate as much aerobic base as possible. So it's just all the basics lumped into 1 6 or 12 week chunk of training.
Yeah, it's not just riding low and slow the whole time.
No, and you can do that, but that'll build essentially just one of those things, aerobic base. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of other things to be addressed in the early phases of training, and I just listed most of them.
Yep. Tim's question, he says, hi guys, first off, 5 stars, keep up the great content. It makes my commute much more enjoyable. I'll get to my questions quickly. I'm trying to optimize my crit and road race bike, and I'm looking to move to smaller disc rotors to shave about 24 grams per wheel. Ooh. Getting light. Says, I currently run 160 millimeter SRAM centerline XR rotors on NV 5.6s with GP 5000 TL tires. It's a pretty optimized setup that he has there.
Which is funny though, because those GP 5000 TLs add like 100 grams per tire based on other tires on the outside for rotational weight.
Right.
So
they're
great tires, but they're heavy.
So he says he would like to move to 140 millimeter rotors. Is there any measurable difference in braking performance in the smaller rotor size for crit and rolling road races, Chicago and Midwest terrain? Second, is there any aero benefit of going to a smaller rotor? Finally, I'm splitting hairs by looking at the smaller rotor, and my time, money would be better spent in waxing chains for the season.
Yes.
So yeah, the answer is yes there. I spoke to my brother about basically like the benefit that you would get, or perhaps the lack of benefit that you would have with going to 140s in terms of braking power. Or I should say leverage in this case, because that's really what we're talking about. We're increasing the size of the rotor. You have more leverage. Basically, your caliper's further out gripping there, so you have more leverage. It's 14.3% more leverage there, and also 14.3% basically at the lever. When you're talking about the force required, it would be a 14% reduction, or I should say increase that you would have to go if you dropped down in rotor size. So 14% isn't small.
Nope.
So that's assuming to get the same braking distance, right, as what you would have to have.
What about like heating up the rotor?
And that's the other thing. Like when you have number one, that rotor is passing through much more quickly because it's a smaller diameter, right? So it doesn't have as much time to cool off. That's why you see with like
and there's
cars,
less material too.
Yeah, exactly right. So they heat up really fast. And Stephen Lewis, friend of the podcast here, he's a big guy. First of all, he's like 200 pounds, but a really good mountain biker. And back in the day, he rode for a Cannondale pro team, and they were running Magura something brakes.
Oh, the hydraulics?
Yeah, they were hydraulic brakes. Yeah. I can't remember which ones they were, but they were Magura brakes, and they were like he was riding with those when they were smaller rotors and they were like smaller calipers, and they were trying to basically like optimize for this sort of a thing. And his rotors genuinely caught on fire. He basically, like, if you've ever seen like a Polynesian fire dancer with like poi balls, he had like 2 poi balls on his bike going down the hill.
It was like Downeyville, right?
Yeah, they were just flaming, and the brake fluid was fueling the fire. So it was just like he just had torches on his bike going down, and the braking did not work very well once they were on fire. So
imagine.
They still work though.
That. He didn't die. He's alive. So, but it's definitely, so that sort of thing can happen. And if you're trying to split hairs with brakes, it's definitely not the spot to do it, especially when we're talking about 24 grams per rotor. That's a small amount.
I found when I do heat up the rotors, the braking performance decreases.
Yes, you'll notice it too.
Yep.
Levers will get a bit softer.
Yeah. When it gets
they'll
close,
come in a little more to the
And the potential
to the
for
bars.
noise.
I don't know about noise.
Yeah, noise doesn't usually
With the heating.
Yeah, like sometimes, like a pad may get glazed, and if a pad gets glazed, then yes. But usually, a pad needs to heat and then cool to glaze over. And some pads will glaze easier than others. And I don't know if it's organic or semi-metallic or metallic. Which ones do? So I'll stay away from that. But yeah, they can glaze. Noise usually has to do with either the caliper being crooked or the caliper or the rotor being bent. Basically, it's causing like a vibration, which makes the noise.
Can the heat lead to bending?
Yeah, totally can. Yep. Especially, and very rarely on road, but on mountain biking, let's say that you are braking really hot, everything, and then you come into a spot where it's like a really harsh turn, like drop sort of a thing, and you put a lot of stress. Your rotors and everything on your bike, it's flexing. So you can flex them there, but much more often, you're going to notice brake fade in the levers.
When it gets close to the handlebars,
it's scary.
I've had it before with brakes that weren't bled well, where you grip it all the way,
Yes.
and you want more, and there's no more. And this can too for
worst
those
nightmare.
Flatlanders. I mean, maybe 140 is fine for you, but then you travel somewhere and you do like Haute Route, and you're like, oh, I'm going to have this hour-long descent on switchbacks, and then it's a whole different thing.
Yes.
I would totally stay with those 160s, and like if you want to change, if you want to lose weight, I mean, I don't think it really matters in general, but those tires that you have are pretty heavy.
48 grams, there's a lot of easy gets with 48 grams elsewhere that aren't going to make, and like I said, like you said, it may not show its head in flat races, but it could rear its ugly head very much so on a descent. So
also, if you're 95 pounds, you may be okay with 140s.
Yeah.
But if you're a big person,
even a normal size rider,
even a normal person, just do 160s.
Do 160s. In terms of the aero benefit, I don't know, or aero detraction of sticking with 160s. I bet that it's not measurable.
Yeah, I bet it's very less than a watt.
Yeah. So it would be a small amount. And then the last thing that I would say on this, just some tips if you want to get more bite out of your brakes. First of all, if your calipers and rotors are not aligned, you're always going to have a soft feel at the brake because you're basically having to bend the rotor before it makes contact with both pads. So it has to be aligned. Secondly, you want to bed in your brakes well, which bedding in your brakes well, basically, there are a lot of different theories on how to do this. The one that I personally do is I ride with my brakes dragging for a short period of time when they're brand new and to get them nice and hot. And then after that, I will let them go and I will do like basically not to entirely stopped and not moving, but really hard braking so that I'll brake, let's just say from 20 to 5 miles an hour, and I'll brake very hard in doing that. And I'll repeatedly do that, and you'll feel your brakes start to bite more. You don't want to get to the point where you're completely stopped and don't move, because a lot of the time you can kind of like press the shape of the rotor or the exact pattern of the rotor into the pad then, because they're so soft.
And don't go endo.
Yes, and don't go over the bars.
Yeah.
But another thing, too, if your pads get glazed, sandpaper. Very light bit of sandpaper. You'll have to bed in your brakes again. And you can also do so on the rotors. Like if you get some sort of weird like sap, or if you get some cleaner or something on your rotors. Gotcha. Just a bit of sandpaper can really help. And then a good brake bleed. And there's man, there's a lot to learn. I would recommend everybody learn to bleed their own brakes, because you'll come across situations where you need to do it. So if you travel with your bike, you'll need to do it.
That's what professional mechanics are for. That's something I do not trust myself with.
Once you figure it out, then you can kind of optimize the whole
once
thing.
I figure it out. How many times does it take me to figure things out usually? 4 to 5, these are brakes.
Yeah. Good point. With Nate's history in bolts, it might not be best.
Go to a mechanic.
So I don't think it's worth chopping weight on your rotors.
Not there, yeah.
You're going to lose 14% leverage with your braking, and possibly open yourself up to a whole lot else, other things. Okay, last one from Amy. And then we're going to go to the live questions you've submitted on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, submit the questions, and we'll be reading through those. Amy says, thank you guys for an awesome show. I've learned so much and recommend your podcast to everyone I know. Thank you for doing that, by the way. That's huge. That's honestly like we ask you to leave 5-star ratings. That's really helpful. But recommending the podcast to people you know, that's huge. We really appreciate that. My question is about FTP test pacing. Say that 10 times fast. I've researched and am super familiar with the advice about breaking the 20-minute test into 4 5-minute chunks and trying to increase power for each block. And what we're talking about there, what are we talking about there, Chad? It's not like actually breaking the 20 minutes into 5 separate intervals.
No, just viewing them as separate 5-minute intervals. Just just chunking it up, basically, and trying to worry about pacing for 5 minutes at a time rather than 20 minutes at a time.
It's a mental trick.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for me personally, it helps a lot.
Any kind of racing,
anybody,
hour 40 crit, a big time trial, anything, like a hill climb,
2-minute VO2 max. Break it into 4 30-second chunks. I mean, it just makes it more tolerable psychologically.
Absolutely does. And you recommend that constantly in the workout text
all the time.
That you have in the workouts when people are doing it. Even if the counter doesn't reset, a lot of the time you reset with the workout text. You tell us like, all right, first 2 minutes down, next 2 minutes, you know.
Yeah, it's so taxing to look at a 2-minute effort as opposed to 4 30-second efforts.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same thing.
Yep. So Amy's heard of this, but she says, I can't find any specific recommendations about where to start out. Everyone says, and she's talking about in terms of intensity or pace or output. Everyone says, in quotes, hard but not too hard. But what does that mean in terms of a percentage of current pre-test FTP? It seems like one would need to start at a minimum of 105% FTP and go up from there, or struggle to make a deficit from starting any lower. Wouldn't it be harder to identify a reasonable percentage increase I hope to attain, then start at the wattage and then hold it for the whole 20 minutes? Or, if possible, go up to for the last 5-ish minutes? Oh, it's a brain bender.
Yeah.
All the pacing information I have seen or heard is too general to be helpful to me as I try to plan to pace my next test better than I have in the past. Thanks for any help you can offer.
Amy, you're hitting like this. We struggle with this of how to teach people how to do this. And I don't think anyone has ever... You pretty much need to know your FTP is before you come in to be able to pace absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
And why take a 20-minute test if you know your FTP before you come in? Right? So this is why we developed the ramp test, because it takes pacing out of the equation.
And prior to the RAM test, this is why FTP tests are a learning prospect, or a learning process, sorry. And that's a bummer on that first one. You just have to completely wing it. And a lot of people completely blow up. A lot of people hold back too far, which is more common. And then you have power zones that are set too low, so you're not really maximizing the training you're doing. But again, I mean, this is what has led us to a ramp test, something that doesn't have to be paced.
Yeah.
It killed me when you like support someone writing to support and you look at their 20-minute test and the way that they paced, you're like, this is no bueno. Yeah, and you have to type back, you should do it again.
Yeah.
Or we would just estimate one like, we probably think you're down 20 watts, but it's no bueno, Amy. Just don't, I don't know. You could do it if you want to do it, but I would, because the ramp test is repeatable.
Yeah.
You can do it, and you don't. It takes that part, the pacing, out of the equation. You can nail it your first time, and every time after that, you can nail it without having to pace. So, just do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't agree more. With that out of the way, maybe we can talk, because let's just say this isn't an FTP test.
Say pacing a 40
40 KTT, something like that, which is longer. You're looking closer to an hour, but the principles are that we'll talk about.
Just kidding. Just kidding. Sorry, I couldn't. Hour 10 for me.
I opened the door. That was good.
I got to finish one first.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Maybe start there.
Yeah.
I did come across, for the record, I'm going to boast just a little bit. I used to think I had a 5204 or 5 was my best. Yeah. I looked at my next year's results. I had a 51:38, so I've done a legit 51. So
nice.
I need
51
I need that. Hey, it's a 51.
Are you gonna do
51:59 is a 51.
Are we doing a 40K TT this year?
I don't think so.
I thought you were gonna go sub.
I don't think they have anything. We don't even have one.
When are we gonna look at our
our
New Year's resolutions?
Oh man, do
New Year's
Chad,
would be a
do
good
we make
time.
New Year's resolutions?
Yeah, you did,
I
Chad.
purged those like January 2.
Jonathan and I talk about it. We got 6 weeks for you to do a lot of stuff.
Well, I'll get right on that.
Someone's gonna listen back to that episode, but we'll go over them all.
Yeah, we will. That'll be
honestly
fun.
We
don't
should
even remember
do
doing that.
Tucker when we do it. Let's have like a flashback where we like flashback and it's black and white.
Was this-
And Chad says all the things he
Was
was
this
gonna
back
do.
when I was drinking beer during the podcast? Because I seriously have no recollection of this.
Nope.
Well,
You were
I can tell you right now, I'm not
ambitious.
going
Yeah.
to.
You don't even know what the goals were, but you're like, I didn't
you
hit
know,
them.
late December brings that out of me, like most people.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we all want to do stuff.
Promise of a new year.
Sure, of course.
I don't even know. I don't remember what mine are, but I think I hit them.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, You more likely than any of us, I think.
Yeah. You had a good year.
I had a good year.
Let's get into pacing. So first things first. It's fine. I try my best to lay out in terms of what pacing I'll need to like maintain for the race, right? Beforehand. Like I try to figure it out. But then I keep like a gigantic, a salt lick, basically, not a grain of salt. They're ready because I'm ready to pull an audible if I need to. And especially when you're talking about pacing long or sustained efforts, I find that I need to, especially in the beginning, I don't need to go by feel. I need to go by power. And then at the end, I have to, or kind of the middle, go by feeling once again. And then at the end, for some extra encouragement, go by power once again. But I'm chasing a feeling the whole time. And that's the main thing. And I guess actually before we even get into how we pace, like what's kind of going on inside the body when we're riding around threshold, Chad?
Yeah, so physiologically, we're trying to achieve what's often called a lactate steady state, a maximal lactate steady state. Probably better argue that it's a balance point. It's not really a steady state. It's something you achieve, and then you have to kind of return to it. But this is neither here nor there. We need to find that place where if we're working too hard or if we work slightly above it, we start to fall off pace. We stay too far below it. We're just a little too comfortable. So it's just this delicate balance between how much pain can I sustain and going too hard such that I don't last the duration of, in this case, a 20-minute effort.
What does that feel like for you, Nate?
Okay, so here's how I think of it. If you break it up into four quarters, first quarter should feel relatively easy for that. Even if you're doing a 1 minute interval, if the first 15 seconds feel like incredibly hard, which I think almost everyone does in their time trials. I've done this before too.
Yes.
Then you're in trouble. That first minute should be, or the first quarter,
25%.
I mean, hard, but not like you're like, ooh, I can do this. Second one a little bit more, and then the third quarter, that's going to be your hardest quarter, and that's where mentally you're going to dig the deepest. And if you prepare, you're like, okay, I'm in the third quarter. This is the hard one. You just finished halfway point. This is where I'm going to be mentally strong. And in the fourth quarter, because it's close to the finish, it just always comes like, if you pace everything else right, I feel like you can do the fourth quarter because you know the finish is coming. That third one is mentally, for me, the very toughest. And if you prepare yourself that's
Just
the deep
about
one,
everybody.
this is where I'm going to go in the hurt box. This is where it is going to hurt relative to the first and second quarter. And the fourth one, I'll squeak that out.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it really gets like, for me, if it's I'll say like if it's a 20-minute effort, it's actually not a whole lot different in terms of what I would try to pace for a 40K in terms of feel. You definitely, it's a higher intensity for just going for 20 minutes, but it kind of feels similar. It's not a whole lot different in that regard.
Yeah, it's you just have to get in touch with what it feels like to sit at the point where you're dealing with as much pain as you can tolerate, knowing that you've got to last not for 1 minute, not for 5, but for 20 minutes.
Yeah, the pain that you can tolerate for that entire time. Yeah.
And the bummer of it is you may have the muscle endurance to do your first 5 minutes for 10 or 15 minutes, but maybe not 20 minutes. So even something that is as long as a 20-minute effort is fraught with new challenges in that you may achieve that supposed balance point or that lactate steady state and have it for 12 of those 20 minutes, but you don't quite have the muscle endurance to last those last 8 minutes. But those first 12 minutes were probably a pretty good representation of what you can do. So
Yeah.
again, there's just a lot of issues to properly pacing these efforts, even for really experienced athletes.
I've seen people say like, I ride, or I know I'm at the right spot when I can taste blood, or I know when I'm and I've never had a specific like physiological indicator that I'm at the spot, and it's changed from day to day. Like the same power output may feel a bit different, but you do, like kind of from a macro perspective, you do feel that same feeling of riding on the line, so to speak, where anymore and lights out. But right here, I can struggle through and keep it going.
And running, for me, it was my breath rate. And I can always never ventilatory
Ventilatory thresholds.
Yeah, those things.
Yeah.
I can never say that word. There's 3 of them, and the second one, that is where I would try to leave my breathing in that until the 4th quarter of like a 10K.
Yeah.
And then I could go to the very extreme hard breathing. But if I ever hit that, and you hear it all the time in the first quarter of a running race, because you can hear people breathe, where they're like, you are not going to last.
No, not at
and then
all.
in a marathon or like a half marathon, I'd be in that first level, V1, for a very long time. And then I would go into V2. Like if I knew if I started in V2 too early, that would be another issue with me. Because sometimes it's hard. You don't really... It's so if you're doing the 40K TT plan, it's great because it will build you up, and you'll do like multiple threshold levels or threshold intervals with less rest. You can get a pretty good idea. What you can do on the trainer, if you can do on the trainer, you can do it outside.
Oh yeah.
Right? But in other ones where you've been training and stuff, especially in running, or if you've been doing other types of intervals, you might not know what your pace is. You might not have a power meter.
Yep.
So I think breathing is a great way to pace.
Breathing is extremely useful. I rank it right up there with FTP, or I'm sorry,
Power.
RPE.
Oh, RP.
Yeah. In terms of when you don't have technology, and you always hear RPE recommendations, but you can just as easily pay attention to your breathing. Learn what your breathing rate is at different effort levels.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Pay attention then while you're on the trainer and tie those in.
The trainer's so good for that because it cuts out everything else. You can really focus in on it. It's a huge benefit of it. Okay, let's get into some live questions. Sound good? First one's from Mitch. He says, what multivitamins do we recommend, and do they need to be, oh boy, that's
chelated.
a tricky, chelated, okay, molecule built for better absorption. The vitamin thing is tough. And we kind of take generally we kind of take a stance of try to get as much as you can from whole foods and from your diet. And then if you can't, that's when you start to look towards supplementation.
I was not here for the episode where I think someone was like about sunscreen. I don't know. I wear sunscreen every day, everybody. But if you eat a healthy diet, you're generally probably not going to have a deficiency, except for vitamin D. Vitamin D, even in trained, in aerobic endurance athletes, you see a decrease in vitamin D, even if they're running every day outside with their shirt off, for an hour in the sun. Vitamin D can also be, you can have too much. It can be toxic. So you can get that tested though with a doctor. You can say, hey, I'm an aerobic athlete. I'm worried about my vitamin D. And if you can look, I'm tired, which we probably all are tired. There's all these things,
It goes
low
with
T.
all the fat soluble vitamins.
Exactly.
A, D, E, and K. So any of those.
So personally, I've been tested low. I get it tested every couple of years, but I do 5,000 international units of vitamin D a day. And the RDA on that is 400 international units. And the 5,000 gets me into a level that's okay for me. In terms of multivitamins, I don't take those. I think it's a great way to make expensive urine. I've gotten other stuff tested. My wife jokes like, maybe you should get it tested because I love to test stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have any other deficiencies. I think
you
we talk about creatine and stuff probably in another episode.
You mentioned really the only 2 things I can agree on is that D is the one that I can stand behind pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
And you got to get tested. You can't just guess. You can't just supplement because you think you need more D. There are so many things that go on effectively behind the scenes that you have to be aware of. So you have to start with a benchmark. You can't just hope for the best. Same
with iron. Iron can increase risk of I think it's prostate cancer in men. I think we're going to talk about this next week. But you can have too much iron for sure. It can be toxic. So you're an endurance athlete, and if you're a man, it's different if you're a woman. But if you're a man, it's maybe not as likely that you're going to have a deficiency. So if you pop a bunch of iron all the time, you could be damaging your health, which is another reason. You can just get it tested, and if your iron levels are good, you don't need to do it.
Yep. And there's also a affliction called hemochromatosis where you extract far more iron from your supplements, from your foods, and that can
mess you up,
create huge problems as well.
For sure.
Anything else? I mean, I make this magic potion.
You're the vitamin guy.
I'm not. I take a lot of stuff that has no science to trying to improve my my immune system and
remove toxins,
longevity.
Sorry,
triggered. No. So the one thing I'm taking right now is creatine. That's not a vitamin, but it's a supplement. Creatine for weightlifting. There's maybe some evidence in improving cognition functions, but there is tons of evidence that it will make you stronger. Like you take creatine, you can lift more weights. And because I'm lifting more weights right now, also will gain water weight during that time. I do take creatine.
Yeah, Mitch will definitely tune in, not next week, but the week after. Because when we talk about the iron deficiency anemia, we'll touch a lot. I'll touch a lot on absorbability or bioavailability that you mentioned there.
Yeah, it's worth saying right there too. We won't have a podcast next week, but we will be back the week after, so we'll be good there. Okay, Richard's question: given I want to do a 50-mile group ride on the weekends, variable pace about 180 TSS, and so that sounds like a pretty stiff pace, just the same, and do a CrossFit session midweek. I only have time for 2 TrainerRoad workouts, about 60 to 75 minutes per week. What 2 would you suggest?
That's a 180 TSS for 50 miles.
It's a hard ride.
That's insane. That's all out.
Either
it's
FTP,
a 50-mile climb.
Either FTP is too low, or that's a seriously hard ride.
Yeah.
So may need to retest Richard, but we'll see. So I guess getting back to that, and he's doing a CrossFit session doing that. It really depends on your goals, Richard. In this case, I can almost assume, or at least it seems like you just want to be a fit person that can ride bikes, but it doesn't seem like you have like a specific event goal, or you probably would have provided that.
I got an idea. Unless you want to go, Chad?
Just looking a CrossFit session midweek, so only one CrossFit session, which means you can probably handle more intensity.
Yeah.
I would probably do something in the form of a VO2 max workout or a sprint intensity workout, and then maybe something for muscle endurance, like sweet spot work.
Yeah, so I would do the Tuesday, Thursday of training plans.
Basically.
So low volume.
Yeah.
So between, and if you want a little more volume, just go like a +1 version of it. But go through sweet spot base, and then either general build, short power, or sustain what you want.
Even the tri plans that we were just talking about with the sprint workouts that kick them off. That'd be a real nice complement to a CrossFit plus endurance sort of week.
But just the Tuesday, Thursday ones, depends on how thrash you get in CrossFit. If your group ride, you probably have a schedule you have to do. But I'm guessing your CrossFit section's on Wednesday. But you can, if it's on Wednesday and it just thrashes you, do instead of on Thursday, do your other ride on Friday.
Yep.
But then if your group ride's on Saturday, you might have to move things too. But if you could do a Tuesday hard ride, Wednesday CrossFit, Thursday day off, Friday another like the TrainerRoad Thursday plan, and then Sunday group ride. You'd recover, like you could be a pretty fit human and sustain that. That'd be great.
MTB Ashan says, no heart rate monitor, no power meter, no cadence, just Strava on the phone. How can you train to get better with just that? Cycling is still a relatively new sport in India, and most cyclists can't afford these things. So if you guys can give a few pointers and maybe some hope that it can be done, that would be great. Just like we said before, RPE-based workouts, you can follow those outside, which is pretty cool. You could have a whole training plan because you don't need any equipment for RPE. It's built in. And
if you don't, depends on, India's a developing country. For other cyclists that don't have that, I would say, you're going to be doing classic stuff where I would do intervals on hills. If you had none of the stuff, a key session, just to be simple to everyone, is say we're going to do 20-minute hill repeats. We're going to do 2 of them, and we're going to go as hard as we can for all 20 minutes. We're going to try to pace it just based on what we talked about for pacing.
So you can stay even the whole way.
I'm going to do that once a week. That will probably give you a big boost. If another one I was going to add, I would say we're going to do 5 by 3 minute intervals all out with 5 to 8 minutes rest in between. That could be on a hill or flat. And then the rest ride with a group. That's not going to be as often as other stuff, but if that's all you got, I think that's a pretty easy, easy to explain to friends, easy to do.
Something.
Chad, would you change anything?
Yeah, no.
With friends group ride, you could do some sprinting and that sort of thing, but just the VO2 max and the threshold.
Yeah.
You'll get a boost if you've never done structured training. A
cool thing to add to this is Catriel Soto from Argentina.
I love when you do that.
Got to say it properly, right? That's their names. He grew up in a town in Argentina that didn't have any roads at all. It just had one dirt road. And
That's a road.
There was, no
I'm
paved,
just
no
giving
anything. And it was one into their town and then one out. And he got to what he is now, which is a Pan American champion and one of the fastest cross country racers in the world. And he got there from riding back and forth on that road. And he's talked about that before. I just rode back and forth on that road, and I just did interval work on that. And that's what he did. And, so you don't need the latest and greatest to do it. You can still get fast.
You don't hear of many, I can't think of, maybe one, Howie Gratz.
Yeah.
Of like high level athletes who never did intervals.
Yeah.
You're just like, I just rode a lot and ended up in the Tour de France.
Which
like,
I'm sure Howie still does or still did
does
intervals.
structures, yeah, exactly.
For sure. But he's famous for taking a much less rigid adherence with his training and much more of a loose structure. But you may be trolling us all, Howie. Who knows?
I know. See, just like it. Like, salmon, I just go ride.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I do.
Okay, let's just go through a couple more, just for time's sake. Okay, so this next one is from Cuba. Says, I feel much more tired after 2 hours outside at 5 degrees Celsius, so that's very cold, than after 3 hours in the summer. That's strange. What can or should I do to address cold weather riding? So that should be backwards, in my opinion. If it's hot outside and you're riding for 3 hours versus 2 hours, let's just assume that you've normalized everything else in terms of effort. It's like the same workload that you're doing. You should be more tired, I would think, in the heat. Should be.
If so, I think it's going to depend too on what the clothing Kuba's wearing. Mm-hmm. So if you're physically like extremely cold during this ride
shivering.
and you're shivering,
guess.
that's going to increase your caloric burn.
Mm-hmm.
Hot weather, you're just going to be super hot.
Yes.
But if you're like if you got comfortable clothing on, and the best is where you like barely sweat.
Yeah.
Or you're not, you don't detect that you're sweating. It's evaporating, which is the very, very best you can do in a 5 degrees Celsius, which is that's like 40 something degrees.
Yeah, it's cold.
But rideable. You should not be burning more calories. I would think maybe it's a little bit like draining psychologically. Like it's not as fun to ride in the cold.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, I want to get out of this. And maybe your bones hurt a little
That's
more
my
than
guess.
the heat.
Just a little more stressful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In terms of what you can do for cold weather riding, as far as a layering system is much better than putting on like it's cold therefore jacket. I would recommend base layers and something like wool that doesn't get clammy if it gets sweaty. And then outside of that, if you have a base layer, a jersey, and a vest and some arm warmers, you can make it through basically anything that isn't wet. Like you can really get through a lot.
Yeah.
So, and then, down on the legs, just cover your legs up. I know Pete has a rule. I think that it's like if it's below 65 degrees or something, Pete always covers his knees.
Or just if you're going to wear arm warmers, you should probably wear knee warmers or leg
probably,
warmers.
right?
What kind of material?
Yeah, this is an inside joke. Merino wool. I'm a big fan of it. So
Really?
I try.
As am I.
Yeah.
Why is merino wool good?
He is the layer master. I mean, when we did alpine touring, he told me what to buy, when to wear it, what to wear each morning, and dude was never wrong.
Yeah, worked great.
But for those who don't know,
yeah. So it's so usually merino wool it goes. I assume it goes through some refinement process that usually cuts down on the allergens that people usually experience with it, or the allergic response that people usually experience with it. But I'm not entirely sure. I've heard that. But the good thing that it does is if it gets wet, it does not it doesn't react in the same way as synthetic fabrics, where when they get wet, they get really cold. They hold a lot of moisture. Wool wicks moisture, but then it also evaporates very quickly with wool, and it also doesn't get cold. So it's really nice. You can build up a little bit of sweat, but then you don't freeze on the descent, because that's the hard part. And I have had that on cold rides where you have a long descent and it freezes you, and it's miserable. You're just shaking. And
Bet you $20 Cuba's wearing cotton.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Or
Getting
nylon,
sweaty
polyester.
and then having to deal with cold sweat clinging to the skin.
That's like with arm warmers. One big thing is I always get arm warmers that are wool, because if I put on, especially if it rains, you put on an arm warmer, it just soaks up all that rain and holds it in there. Because a lot of them tend to feel like kind of like a wetsuity material, almost just like thin, and it just soaks up water. So
I'm pretty sure merino wool is from a different aged sheep or something. I forget. If I could I don't have a Googler.
Tucker's putting it in right now into the forum, so you can look up episode 231 and find it there.
But I'm allergic to wool, as most things. We found out I'm allergic to bees in Hawaii. That was amazing.
Nate's earlobe looked like he had gauges in there. It was huge.
No, my whole ear got twice the size of my other ear. It's still a little bit bigger. Yeah. But anyways, merino wool, it depends. For those who are allergic to wool, before you go spend a lot of money, it depends on the brand. Some merino wool stuff I can wear. I have merino wool socks on right now. But other like the Rafa arm warmers, I cannot wear them. I am itch city.
What a bummer.
I know, it is a bummer.
What brand socks do you have? Do you know?
Darn Tough.
Darn Tough. Okay.
Yep. I think they're like wool and polyester kind of stuff. But by the way, they're amazing socks, lifetime warranty. I put holes in them. You send them back, they send you new socks.
If you're a skier, big tip, Darn Toughs are really good.
Yep.
So
I got Darn Tough ski socks too.
They make specific ski socks that are very good.
Really?
So yeah.
Yeah, they're like thin but then very long too.
Yeah, you don't want thick socks.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You
want I have no clue what I'm talking about. I'm just like, yeah, you're right.
Let's go into the final question here from Sima 1997 Abel. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm worried that I'm going to get Bart Simpsoned by reading out people's names. So. All right. Says
I need a man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Says, hey guys, I have a question. When would you recommend to start structured cycling training for the next season? I have searched on the internet, but I could only find tips on what to do for the off season.
Yesterday.
Yeah, it's a mean response there, but probably
no,
accurate.
really.
Yeah. Here's the thing: like, it all depends on. It depends on a lot of factors, but. So I guess let's just share anecdotes maybe on when we would plan to start and how we came to that decision.
When you are motivated to start it. So don't think that like, oh, it's too early to start, because this is like a multi-year process, right? Like it could be a 15-year process. Don't be like, oh, I'm going to burn out if I don't, it's too early to start it. Yeah. Maybe you're not going to be doing your crit high intensity workouts in October, or it's almost November. But yeah, when you want to go start training, and the reason you have an off season is to recharge your body, which really doesn't take, we've talked about it, that long, but also recharge mentally. And if you're not recharged mentally, and the idea of getting on a bike, like you're like, yuck, you're not ready.
Yes.
So do what you need to do.
Yeah, but once you're ready, get on the bike and
do it.
If you feel like things are coming a little too quickly, maybe you're doing too much work too soon in the season, you can modify on the fly over the entire course of this.
And reduce the volume.
Yep.
Yeah. If you feel like you're doing too much and like you're starting to get, because that's, I think most people, they start off season, too much volume.
Yeah. If you're following our training plans, you need at least 28 weeks, basically, if you were to follow through the plans, right? So that's kind of like a benchmark starting point if you're using our plan.
But you can totally have more.
And you can also have less too. Like you can truncate the plans. We talked about how to do that plenty of times. So you can, but that's, I guess, kind of like a benchmark of like an idea of where you would start in that regard. I'm starting much more than 28 weeks. I'm starting out way further ahead. Motivation's high.
Yep.
But then on top of that too, I did a long build last year and I did well, but I lacked a lot of consistency. So this year, my goal is just consistency. That was one of my New Year's resolutions actually, was consistency. And I didn't do very well in the first half of the year, but doing better on the second half.
I'm like a year and a half from my goal of Cape Epic.
Yeah.
And the next after that, it's like another year for the triathlon.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm last in the running for prediction of performance.
Somebody should start an official poll on the forum on who's going to do.
Maybe Chad McNeese can do this.
2 years
out.
Yeah.
Chad, what we need is who is going to have the overall fastest time.
Yes.
That's one poll. The second poll is who's going to perform best in their age group.
Yes.
And the third one, which would be a checkbox in all of us, who could qualify. But there's no chance I'm going to qualify. Just so
you don't think
knows.
so? Huh?
Not with that attitude.
I mean,
Chad's it's a dream, and I'll try. But they are so fast.
If you qualify, do you race? Do you go for it?
Oh, of course.
The reason I asked that, Chad, if you qualify, do you race?
Yes, he's doing it. It's his job.
Cross that bridge when if.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, but there's no. So yeah, Chad McNeese, if you're listening to this, could you put that on the forum, because that'd be great, and that can be our. Maybe call it like Kona 2021 challenge. Yeah. Because then maybe multiple people
2021?
2022.
2022.
Sorry, 2022.
Cape Epic is 2021.
That's right.
Yeah.
Man, we're planning ahead.
Yeah, that we are.
Anyway, so I'm just saying though.
Chad just got this long stare.
I just got a little worried there. I thought we were talking about 2021 for a second.
But I'm just saying, like, your build can be multiple years.
Yeah,
and
sure.
it's like, well, when should I start? Am I too early to start for that? No, you're like, I'm not too early to start.
Never
for
too early
Epic.
to start for anything, honestly. I mean, you just have to ask yourself, how long can I stay motivated?
Yeah.
And am I motivated right now?
I shouldn't be doing like 30-hour weeks because I'm used to 10-hour weeks. That would be too much.
Too much.
But yeah, hopefully I can, by the time that happens, I can build up to 12, 13, 14, 15-hour weeks.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the podcast. Whether you were listening to it or watching it on YouTube, we really appreciate it. And like we mentioned earlier, one of the best things you could do is sharing this podcast with others. That's like a huge help.
Supports us.
Yeah. And also, if we break a lot of the topics that we discuss, we break them into smaller clips. Producer Tucker does that. Thank you, Tucker. So you can find like specific conversations that you like, that sort of thing. If you just subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get updates on that every day when we have a video that comes out every day.
And like them. Even if you don't watch them, just like them.
Sure, yeah.
It helps. That's YouTube. The more it gets liked, YouTube shows it to more people.
Yep.
People find about us. The more employees we get, the more engineers we get, the faster everyone gets.
Yeah, exactly. Makes it easy for you to share the podcast, and it's just a short video clip. And if you're listening to it, reviewing it, it helps us a ton. Let us know if we don't deserve a 5-star review. Just contact us at support@trainerroad.com, and we'll try to be better so then we can earn that 5-star review. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, of course, check out behind us here, TrainerRoad. It works. We promise. That's what we're all about. We'll see you all next week. Actually, not next week, the week after next. See you then.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.